I'm not pretty, she whispered from behind the lace veil, her voice breaking like dried clay. The cowboy standing before her, dust on his boots, honesty in his eyes, didn't flinch. That's fine, Wyatt Carver said, his words carrying the weight of a promise. I need honest, not fancy. In that moment, beneath the brutal New Mexico sun, two damaged souls found each other. A man abandoned by beauty, a woman destroyed by cruelty. This is their story, a tale of scars, shame, and the kind of love that doesn't need perfection. Stay with me until the end and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The stagecoach arrived in Dry Creek on a Tuesday afternoon when the sun sat high and merciless, turning the desert into a furnace and the main street into a ribbon of cracked earth. Dust devils spun themselves into brief existence before collapsing back into nothing, and the few people brave enough to be outside moved with the slow deliberation of those who understood that haste, in this heat, was a form of suicide. Wyatt Carver stood outside Miller's General Store, his hat pulled low against the glare, watching the stage thunder toward town with a plume of dust rising behind it, like smoke from a grass fire. His hands were steady at his sides, but his heart, that traitorous organ, hammered against his ribs with an anxiety he hadn't felt since the war. He was 42 years old, too old, some said, to be sending for a mail-order bride. Too weathered, too quiet, too set in his ways. But loneliness had a way of making a man reconsider what he thought he needed, and Wyatt had spent enough years talking to his cattle and his horses to know that solitude, for all its simplicity, was a slow kind of dying. The letter had arrived 4 months ago, written in a careful, educated hand on paper that smelled faintly of lavender. Miss Evelyn Mercer of Boston, Massachusetts, seeks correspondence with gentlemen of good character. Age 28, experience in household management, no family remaining, willing to relocate for purposes of matrimony. The formality of it had appealed to him. No flowery promises, no declarations of beauty or charm, just facts, simple and stark. He'd written back that same evening, his own words clumsy but honest. I am a cattleman. My ranch is small but profitable. I live simply and work hard. I cannot offer luxury, but I can offer respect and provision. If this suits you, I would be honored to make your acquaintance. 3 months of letters had followed. Hers were always proper, always careful, filled with observations about weather and books and the changing seasons. She never spoke of her past beyond the barest facts. Orphaned young, raised by an aunt who had recently passed, no prospects in Boston that would sustain her. She asked thoughtful questions about his land, his work, the territory. She never once mentioned her appearance, and neither did he. When he'd finally proposed, awkwardly, in a letter that took him 6 drafts to complete, her acceptance had been swift. I accept your offer of marriage. I will arrive on the afternoon stage, first Tuesday of September. I ask only that you not judge me too harshly when we meet. Yours in hope, Evelyn Mercer. That last line had puzzled him. Not judge her harshly? What did that mean? Now, as the stage rolled to a stop in front of the hotel, and Hank Peterson climbed down from the driver's box with his usual string of curses about the heat and the road, Wyatt felt his mouth go dry. Got your bride here, Carver, Hank called out, loud enough that heads turned up and down the street. Special delivery from Boston, Massachusetts. Wyatt moved forward, conscious of the eyes watching from windows and doorways. Dry Creek was small enough that anything unusual became entertainment, and a mail-order bride was about as unusual as it got. The stage door swung open, and Hank extended a hand to help the passenger descend. The woman who emerged wore a traveling dress of dark blue wool, impractical for the heat, Wyatt thought absently, and carried a single worn carpet bag. But it was her face, or rather, the lack of it, that stopped him cold. A veil of delicate black lace covered her entirely from the crown of her head to below her chin, secured by pins to a simple bonnet. Through the intricate pattern, he could make out the suggestion of features, the curve of a cheek, the shadow of a mouth, but nothing distinct, nothing real. She stood very still on the bottom step of the stage, one gloved hand gripping the doorframe as if she might collapse without its support. Even through the veil, he could sense her fear. Miss Mercer? His voice came out rougher than he intended. She turned toward him, and though he couldn't see her eyes clearly, he felt the weight of her gaze. Mr. Carver. Her voice was soft, cultured, with the precise diction of someone educated in the East. It trembled slightly, like a wire pulled too tight. Yes. He cleared his throat, suddenly aware that he was staring. Welcome to Dry Creek. Thank you. An awkward silence stretched between them while Hank unloaded her trunk, larger than the carpetbag but still modest, and set it in the dust with a thump. Behind them, Wyatt could hear the whispers starting already. Mrs. Henderson from the millinery, old Samuel from the livery, the Pritchard twins who never missed an opportunity for gossip. Is she disfigured? Maybe she's hiding because she's playing. Lord, what did Carver get himself into? Wyatt's jaw tightened, but he kept his eyes on the woman before him. She hadn't moved from the step, and he realized with a start that she was waiting for him to reject her, perhaps, waiting for him to tear away the veil and expose whatever she was hiding. He did neither. Instead, he reached down and picked up her trunk with one hand, her carpetbag with the other. My wagon's just down the way. It's not much of a ride to the ranch, about an hour. There's water in the canteen if you're thirsty. For a long moment, she didn't respond. Then slowly, she descended the final step and stood on the dusty street of Dry Creek, New Mexico territory, looking small and lost and utterly alone. Mr. Carver, Her hands twisted together at her waist. I must tell you something before we go any further. He waited. She lifted her chin slightly, a gesture of defiance that seemed to cost her. I am not what you might have expected. I am not... Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. I'm not pretty. The words hung in the hot air between them. Around them, the whispers grew louder, more eager. This was better than they'd hoped, actual drama, playing out right in front of the hotel. Wyatt set down the trunk and the bag. He took a step closer to her, close enough that he could see the way her shoulders tensed, the way her breathing quickened with what he recognized as terror. Miss Mercer, he said quietly, his voice low enough that only she could hear. I sent for a wife, not a painting. I need someone who can be honest with me, who can work beside me, who can make a life in a hard place. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I don't need fancy. I need real. If you can give me that, then what you look like under that veil doesn't matter one bit. He saw her hands loosen slightly, saw the rigid line of her shoulders soften by a fraction. But no. His voice was gentle but firm. We can talk about it later if you want to, or never, if you prefer. But right now, I'm just going to take you home. Home. The word seemed to strike her physically. He saw her sway slightly, as if the weight of it was too much. She drew a shaky breath. You don't want to see? He understood what she was asking. Part of him was curious, he couldn't deny that. But a larger part, the part that remembered his own wounds, his own shame, knew that whatever she was hiding, she had her reasons. Not unless you want to show me, he said. And not here, with half the town watching like it's a Sunday social. He picked up her belongings again and gestured toward the wagon. Come on, let's get you out of this heat. She followed him, moving with the careful steps of someone walking through a dream, or a nightmare. He loaded her trunk into the back of the wagon, then turned to help her up onto the seat. When his hand closed around her elbow, gently, respectfully, over the fabric of her sleeve, she flinched so violently that she nearly fell. I'm sorry, she gasped. I'm sorry, I didn't mean... It's all right. He kept his voice calm, kept his movements slow and obvious. I'm just going to help you up, that's all. She nodded jerkily and allowed him to assist her onto the seat. She sat with her back rigid, her hands folded in her lap, her veiled face turned straight ahead. Everything about her posture screamed wariness, as if she expected violence at any moment. What the hell had happened to this woman? Wyatt climbed up beside her, taking care to leave plenty of space between them. He released the brake and clicked to the horses, and the wagon lurched into motion, leaving Dry Creek and its whispers behind. They rode in silence for the first 20 minutes, the only sounds, the creak of the wagon, the jingle of harness, and the eternal wind that swept across the high desert like the breath of something vast and indifferent. The land stretched out in all directions, brown earth studded with sage and piñon, broken by sudden arroyos and distant mesas that shimmered in the heat haze. It was beautiful in its harshness, Wyatt had always thought. Unforgiving, but honest. The land didn't pretend to be anything other than what it was. Finally, because the silence was becoming oppressive and he sensed that she needed to hear his voice, needed the reassurance that he wasn't angry, wasn't disgusted, he spoke. "I should tell you about the ranch," he said, keeping his tone conversational. "It's not much compared to what you're probably used to in Boston. The house has 4 rooms, kitchen, sitting room, and 2 bedrooms. There's a well with good water, a barn for the horses, a chicken coop. I run about 200 head of cattle on the range, plus I do some horse trading when I can." She didn't respond, but he thought he saw her head tilt slightly toward him, listening. "I've got a hired hand, old fellow named Dutch, who comes by 3 times a week to help with the heavy work. Otherwise, it's just me. And now you." He paused. "I know it's not what you're accustomed to. It's isolated. The nearest neighbor is 4 miles south. Town is 10 miles north, as you've seen. In winter, sometimes we get snowed in for weeks at a time." Still nothing. "I guess what I'm trying to say is, it's a lonely place. I won't lie about that. But it's peaceful, too. The sky opens up so wide at night you feel like you could fall into it. The stars are clearer than you've ever seen. And in spring, when the rain comes, wildflowers cover the hills like somebody threw down a blanket of color." He risked a glance at her. She was still staring straight ahead, but her hands had loosened slightly in her lap. "I'm not good with words," he admitted. "Never have been. My first wife used to say I could go 3 days without speaking and not even notice." He stopped, surprised at himself. He hadn't meant to mention Margaret. "Your first wife?" Her voice was barely audible under the rattle of the wagon, but there was something in it, not jealousy, but careful interest. "Margaret. We married when I was 23. She died in childbirth 6 years later. The baby, too." The old pain was still there, dull and familiar like an ache in the bones before rain. "That was 14 years ago." "I'm sorry." "So was I." He cleared his throat. "Anyway, after that, I got used to being alone. Maybe too used to it. But lately, I've been thinking that a man can be too comfortable with loneliness. It starts to feel like safety, but really, it's just emptiness." The words surprised him even as he spoke them. He'd never articulated it quite that way before, not even to himself. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, it is." They fell back into silence, but it felt different now, less oppressive, more companionable. The wagon climbed a long rise, and at the top Wyatt pulled the horses to a stop. "There," he said, pointing. "That's home." The ranch sat in a shallow valley, sheltered by low hills to the north and west. The house was simple, adobe and timber, with a pitched roof and a covered porch that ran the length of the front. The barn stood behind it, weathered but solid. A windmill turned lazily in the breeze, pumping water into a stock tank where a few cattle stood in the shade. It wasn't much, but he'd built most of it with his own hands, and he was proud of it in a quiet way. Beside him, Evelyn was motionless for a long moment. Then she said, so softly he almost missed it, "It's perfect." Something in his chest loosened at those words. "I'm glad you think so." They descended into the valley, and as they approached the house, Wyatt found himself seeing it through her eyes, the chickens scratching in the yard, the garden plot he'd tried to keep up but that had mostly gone to weeds, the loneliness of it all laid bare in the failing afternoon light. He pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the porch and set the brake. "Well, here we are." She didn't move. "Miss Mercer? I need to ask you something." Her voice was steadier now, but still quiet. "And I need you to answer me honestly." "All right. Why did you send for a bride? Truly?" He considered the question, turning it over in his mind. He could give her platitudes, say he wanted children, wanted someone to cook and clean, wanted the respectability of marriage. All of those things were partly true, but she'd asked for honesty, and honesty was what he'd promised. "Because I was tired of talking to ghosts," he said finally. "Tired of living in a house that was more tomb than home. Tired of measuring my life in seasons and cattle counts, and days that bled into each other until I couldn't remember what month it was." He met her veiled gaze. I wanted to know what it felt like to matter to someone again. To have someone to come home to build something with another person instead of just maintaining what's already there. He stopped, feeling foolish. That probably sounds... No. Her voice was fierce suddenly, vibrant with emotion. No, it sounds real. Your turn, he said. Why did you answer my advertisement? Her hands twisted in her lap again, that nervous gesture he was beginning to recognize. Because I was tired of being invisible. Tired of walking through the world like a ghost no one wanted to see. Tired of pity and whispers and doors closing before I even reached them. She took a shaky breath. I wanted to go somewhere no one knew me, somewhere I could start over, even if... She trailed off. Even if what? Even if it was a lie. The words hung between them, stark and painful. What's the lie? He asked gently. That I could be a normal wife, that I could give you what you need, that I could be... She made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. That I could be someone worth loving. Wyatt climbed down from the wagon and walked around to her side. He stood there, looking up at her, this veiled woman who had traveled halfway across the country to marry a stranger because both of them were too broken to fit anywhere else. Miss Mercer, Evelyn, I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to believe it. He kept his voice low and steady. I'm not expecting perfection. I'm not expecting beauty or grace or any of the things the storybooks talk about. I'm just expecting honesty. And maybe, if we're lucky, kindness. The rest of it, all the rest of it, we'll figure out as we go. She was silent for so long he thought she might not respond. Then, slowly, she extended her hand toward him. He took it, feeling the tremor in her fingers even through the glove, and helped her down from the wagon. They stood facing each other in the dusty yard, while the sun sank lower and the shadows grew long across the valley. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, and the wind carried the scent of sage and dust and possibility. Can I show you the house? He asked. She nodded. He led her up the steps to the porch, conscious of the way she moved, carefully, as if expecting the boards to give way beneath her feet. The front door opened with a creak that reminded him he needed to oil the hinges, and they stepped into the dim coolness of the sitting room. It was spare, he knew. A sofa he'd inherited from his parents, a rocking chair by the fireplace, a small table with an oil lamp. No curtains on the windows, no rugs on the floor, no softness anywhere. A bachelor's house, utilitarian and empty. I know it's not much, he began, but she was already moving through the space, one hand trailing along the back of the sofa, her head turning to take it all in. It's clean, she said, and he heard the surprise in her voice. I expected... Expected what? Expected a mess. Most men living alone. She stopped. I'm sorry. That was presumptuous. It's all right. You're not wrong about most men. He gestured toward the kitchen doorway. I'm not much of a cook, but I can manage the basics. There's a root cellar out back for storage, and the well water's cold even in summer. She followed him through the house as he showed her each room, the kitchen with its cast iron stove and rough-hewn table, the sitting room with its fireplace built from river rock, the 2 bedrooms at the back of the house. At the door to the second bedroom, she stopped. Is this where your wife... No. He understood what she was asking. This was going to be the nursery. We just finished it when... He cleared his throat. It's never been used. I thought maybe you'd want it. For your own space, until you're ready to share the other room? Her voice was barely a whisper. Until we're both ready, he corrected. If we ever are. And if we're not, that's fine too. I didn't bring you here to force anything. We can take this as slow as we need to. He saw her shoulders shake slightly and realized with alarm that she was crying, silent tears that soaked into the veil without falling. Hey now! He reached toward her instinctively, then stopped himself. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. Her voice was thick with emotion. That's just the first time anyone has ever asked what I needed instead of just taking. The words hit him like a fist to the gut. He wanted to ask what she meant, wanted to know who had hurt her and how, but he held back. There would be time for those stories later when she trusted him enough to share them, if she ever did. Well, he said, aiming for lightness, you're safe here. Whatever happened before, whatever you're running from, it doesn't matter. This is a new start. For both of us. She nodded, wiping at her eyes beneath the veil. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. You haven't tasted my cooking. That earned him a small, wet laugh, and he felt an absurd sense of victory. They stood in the narrow hallway, not quite strangers anymore, but not yet anything more, while the light faded outside and the house settled around them with small creaks and sighs. I should get your things, Wyatt said finally, and start some supper. Nothing fancy, just beans and cornbread, but it'll fill you up. Can I help? You've been traveling all day. You should rest. Please. There was something desperate in the word. I need to be useful. I need to do something with my hands, or I'll... She didn't finish the sentence. All right, he said gently. You can help. They worked together in the kitchen as twilight fell, moving around each other with the awkwardness of strangers learning a new dance. She wouldn't let him see her eat, said she wasn't hungry, though he didn't believe her, but she laid the table and sliced the cornbread and moved through the space with an efficiency that spoke of long practice. You're good at this, he observed. I kept house for my aunt for 12 years. After she died, I worked briefly for a family in Boston, caring for their children. She paused. Until what? Until the father decided I was too unsettling to have around the children because of my face. The casual cruelty of it made his hand still over the pot of beans. That's idiotic. That's reality. Her voice was flat. Children were frightened. Parents complained. I couldn't find work anywhere. Eventually I realized that if I wanted any kind of life, I needed to go somewhere no one knew me. Somewhere I could... She trailed off. Hide, he suggested quietly. Survive. They ate in silence, or rather, he ate while she sat across from him, her hands folded in her lap, watching through the veil as he mechanically consumed beans and cornbread that tasted like sawdust because all he could think about was the woman across from him and the life that had driven her to this. After dinner, he showed her how to work the pump at the sink where the extra blankets were stored, how to bank the fire in the stove so it would last through the night. She absorbed everything with quiet attention, asking occasional questions in that soft, careful voice. When full darkness had fallen and the oil lamps cast long shadows through the house, he finally said, I should let you get some rest. Morning comes early on a ranch. What time should I wake? Whenever you're ready. There's no schedule tomorrow, it's just Sunday. We can take it easy, get you settled in properly. She hesitated in the doorway of the small bedroom. Mr. Carver? Wyatt, please. Wyatt. She seemed to test the name on her tongue. I just want you to know I'll try to be a good wife, to earn my place here. I know I'm not what you wanted, but I'll work hard and I'll... Stop. He said it gently but firmly. You don't have to earn anything. You're here because I asked you to be. That's enough. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, good night, Wyatt. Good night, Evelyn. He heard the door close softly, heard the rustle of fabric as she moved around the small room. He stood in the hallway for a moment, wondering what the hell he'd gotten himself into before retreating to his own bedroom. He lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling and listening to the night sounds. The wind, the distant yip of coyotes, the creak of the house settling. And underneath it all, very faintly, the sound of crying from the room next door. He wanted to go to her, wanted to offer comfort, but he knew that his presence would only make it worse. Whatever grief she was carrying, whatever shame and fear and sorrow had driven her to hide her face from the world, she had to carry it alone for now. But maybe, he thought, as sleep finally claimed him, maybe not forever. Maybe, with time and patience and the kind of honesty they'd promised each other, they could learn to carry their burdens together. The thought sustained him as he drifted off, and his last conscious awareness was of gratitude, strange and unexpected, for this broken woman sleeping in the room next door. Whatever came next, at least he wasn't alone anymore. And neither was she. The first light of morning crept through the window like a hesitant visitor, painting the rough adobe walls in shades of gold and amber. Wyatt woke to the sound of chickens scratching in the yard and the familiar creak of the windmill turning in the early breeze. For a moment, he forgot. Forgot that his house was no longer empty, forgot that a woman slept in the room next door, forgot that his life had fundamentally changed in the span of a single afternoon. Then memory returned, and with it came a strange mixture of anticipation and anxiety that made his chest feel tight. He dressed quickly in the dim light, pulling on worn denim and a cotton shirt that had seen better days. His fingers fumbled with the buttons. When had he last cared what he looked like? And he ran a hand through his hair in a futile attempt to tame it before giving up with a grunt of frustration. The house was silent as he made his way to the kitchen. He half expected to find Evelyn already awake, already working, but the small bedroom door remained closed. He paused outside it for a moment, listening, and heard nothing but the soft whisper of breathing that told him she still slept. Good. She needed the rest. He moved quietly through the kitchen, starting the fire in the stove with practiced efficiency, filling the coffee pot with water from the pump. The familiar rituals steadied him, gave his hands something to do while his mind turned over the events of the previous day, like a man examining a puzzle with pieces that didn't quite fit. She'd said she wasn't pretty, said it like a confession, like a crime she'd committed. The veil suggested something more than simple plainness, suggested damage, disfigurement, something she believed would repel him. But what? And more importantly, what had happened to make her believe that her appearance defined her worth? The coffee began to boil, filling the kitchen with its bitter, familiar aroma. Wyatt poured himself a cup and stood at the window, watching the sun climb higher over the eastern hills. The land stretched out before him, harsh and beautiful in the morning light, and he felt the old peace settle over him, the peace of a man who knew his place in the world, who understood the rhythms of seasons and weather and the patient work of building something that would last. Could he build that with Evelyn? Could two broken people create something whole? He didn't know, but he was willing to try. Behind him, a door opened softly. He turned to find Evelyn standing in the hallway, still veiled, still dressed in the dark blue traveling dress from yesterday. She looked small and uncertain in the doorway, her hands clasped at her waist in that nervous gesture he was learning to recognize. "Good morning," he said, keeping his voice gentle. "Coffee?" "Yes, thank you." She moved into the kitchen with small, careful steps, like someone walking through a room filled with obstacles only she could see. He poured her a cup and set it on the table, then stepped back to give her space. She approached slowly, and he realized with a start that she was assessing the room, checking distances, noting exits, calculating risks with the unconscious wariness of prey. What had been done to this woman? She stood beside the table but didn't sit, didn't reach for the coffee. After a moment, she said quietly, "I need to tell you something." "All right?" I can't eat or drink in front of people, not without removing the veil, and I can't." Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. "I can't remove it. Even here? Even with just me? Especially with you." The words came out in a rush. "I know that sounds strange, but I can't bear the thought of you looking at me with disgust, with pity. I've seen those looks too many times, and She stopped, her breathing quick and shallow. "I'm sorry. I know this isn't what you agreed to. I know I'm being difficult." Wyatt set down his own coffee cup with deliberate care. "You're not being difficult. You're being honest, which is what we agreed on." He thought for a moment. "What if I turned my back while you ate or drank? Would that help?" She went very still. "You would do that?" "Why wouldn't I?" "Because most men would demand—" She didn't finish the sentence. "I'm not most men." He said it simply, without pride or arrogance. "And demanding things from you isn't how this is going to work. We're partners now, or we're trying to be. Partners figure things out together." He saw her shoulders tremble slightly, saw her hands tighten at her waist. Then, almost inaudibly, "Thank you. Don't thank me for basic decency." He moved toward the stove. "I'm going to start breakfast. Eggs and salt pork. I'll keep my back turned while I cook, and you can drink your coffee. When it's ready, I'll set your plate on the table and go outside to tend the chickens. You can eat in private. Does that work?" "Yes." The word was thick with emotion. "Yes, that works." True to his word, he kept his back to her as he cracked eggs into the skillet and cut thick slices of salt pork to fry alongside them. Behind him, he heard the soft clink of the cup being lifted, the nearly silent sound of her drinking. He focused on the cooking, giving her the privacy she needed, and tried not to think about what kind of life had taught her that basic kindness was something rare and precious. When the food was ready, he plated it quickly and set both plates on the table. "I'll be outside, miss," he said, still not turning. "Take your time." He grabbed his hat from the peg by the door and stepped out into the morning, pulling the door closed behind him. The chickens greeted him with their usual chaos, flocking around his feet as he scattered grain from the bucket he kept by the coop. The rooster, a bad-tempered bird he'd named General for his autocratic tendencies, strutted importantly through the hens, and Wyatt found himself smiling at the familiar absurdity of it. He took his time with the chores, giving Evelyn space to eat without feeling rushed. He checked the water trough, examined the fence line near the garden for damage, inspected the barn to make sure everything was secure. The sun climbed higher, warming the air, and somewhere in the distance he could hear cattle lowing. It was a good morning, he thought, a morning full of possibility. When he finally returned to the house, he knocked on his own door, a strange gesture that felt necessary, before entering. "Evelyn, can I come in?" "Yes." Her voice came from the sitting room. He found her standing by the window, looking out at the valley. Both plates had been cleared and washed and set in the drying rack. The kitchen was spotless, tidier than he'd left it. She'd been busy. "You didn't have to clean up," he said. "I wanted to. I need—" She paused, searching for words. "I need to contribute, to feel useful. If I just sit idle, I'll—" Again, she didn't finish. "Fair enough." He crossed to the table and picked up a piece of paper and a pencil. "I'm going to make a list of everything that needs doing around here. Regular chores, maintenance, that kind of thing. Then we can divide it up between us." "How does that sound?" "You're asking me?" "Of course I'm asking you. This is your home now, too. You should have a say in how things are run." She turned from the window, and though he couldn't see her expression through the veil, he sensed her confusion. Most husbands don't ask their wives' opinions on such things. "Well, I'm not most husbands." He sat down at the table and began writing. Now daily chores. Chickens need feeding and eggs collected. Garden needs watering when it's dry. Kitchen, obviously. Laundry once a week. What am I missing? Slowly, hesitantly, she moved to sit across from him. Bread baking, butter churning if you have a cow. Mending, preserving when there's produce. Cleaning, though that depends on how particular you are. I'm not particular about much except the barn. I like the barn kept organized, makes it easier to find things when you're in a hurry. He continued writing. What about things you need? Supplies from town, tools, anything like that? She folded her hands on the table. I don't know what you already have. Then we'll make an inventory together. He pushed the paper toward her. You go through the kitchen, the pantry, the root cellar. Write down what's there and what's missing. I'll do the same for the barn and the workshop. Tomorrow, we'll compare lists and see what needs ordering. She stared at the paper as if it were written in a foreign language. You trust me to do that? Why wouldn't I? Because you barely know me. Because I'm... She stopped herself. Because you're what? My wife? The person I asked to be here? He kept his tone gentle but firm. Evelyn, I meant what I said yesterday. This is a partnership. I'm not your master and you're not my servant. We're two people trying to build a life together. That means we both get a say. We both contribute. We both matter. The silence stretched long enough that he wondered if he'd said too much, pushed too hard. But then she reached out and took the paper, her gloved fingers trembling slightly as they closed around it. I'll make the inventory, she said quietly, and I'll do it thoroughly. I know you will. They spent the rest of the morning working separately but in tandem, him in the barn and outbuildings, her in the house. He could hear her moving through the rooms, opening cabinets and drawers, her footsteps soft but steady. Occasionally he'd hear a small sound, a dish being set down, a door being closed, and each time he felt a strange warmth in his chest. His house wasn't empty anymore. It had a heartbeat again. By midday, the heat had become oppressive, and Wyatt returned to the house to find Evelyn sitting at the kitchen table with pages of careful notes spread before her. Her handwriting was neat and precise, each item listed with attention to detail that spoke of an organized mind. "You've been thorough," he observed, scanning the lists. "You're low on flour and sugar, out of cinnamon completely. The coffee's nearly gone. You have plenty of beans and salt pork, but no fresh meat, no vegetables except what's struggling in the garden, no butter, no milk, no cheese." She tapped the paper. "You've been living like a hermit." He had the grace to look embarrassed. "I tend to forget about things like cinnamon and vegetables, and anything that requires more effort than opening a can or a jar." Her tone was gentle, but there was a hint of amusement in it that made him smile. "Guilty as charged. We'll need to place a substantial order in town, or—" She hesitated. "Do you have a milk cow? Chickens lay eggs, but for butter and cheese, you need—" "I know what I need." He scratched his jaw. "I used to have a cow. Sold her after Margaret died. Thought I didn't need the bother. But you're right. We should get another one. And maybe a few more chickens, if you're willing to tend them. Plus, we should think about expanding the garden, putting in more variety." "I can do that." There was something almost eager in her voice. "I'm good with gardens. My aunt had a large one, and I managed it for years. We could have tomatoes, beans, squash, herbs. Maybe even some melons if the season's right." "Then that's what we'll do." He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. "We'll go into town next Saturday for supplies. That gives us a week to get everything organized here, and it means we won't have to deal with the Sunday crowd." She went very still. "Town?" "Just to Miller's General Store. We'll be in and out quickly, I promise." Her hands twisted in her lap. "The way people looked at me yesterday, the things they whispered, I heard them, even through the veil." "I know." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "And I'm sorry for that. Small towns are full of small minds sometimes. But here's the thing, you live here now. This is your home. Eventually, people will get used to seeing you. The novelty will wear off, and they'll move on to the next bit of gossip." "You don't understand." Her voice rose slightly, edged with panic. "It's not just curiosity. They'll say terrible things. They'll talk about what might be under the veil. They'll make up stories. Let them." His voice was calm, steady. "Let them talk. Their words can't hurt you unless you give them power. And me? I don't give a damn what anyone in Dry Creek thinks. Never have." She was quiet for a long moment. Then, barely audible, "You're a strange man, Wyatt Carver." "I've been called worse." That earned him a small, surprised laugh, the first real laugh he'd heard from her, and the sound of it did something to his heart that he couldn't quite name. The afternoon passed in a comfortable rhythm. Wyatt worked on repairing a section of fence that had been damaged in the last windstorm, while Evelyn, after some coaxing, agreed to rest in the shade of the porch with a book he'd dug out from somewhere in his bedroom. He glanced back at the house occasionally and saw her sitting in the rocking chair, still veiled, the book open in her lap. She looked small there, dwarfed by the vastness of the landscape, but she also looked not peaceful exactly, but less tense than she'd been, as if the silence and space of the ranch were beginning to work their way into her bones. That evening, they repeated the morning's ritual, him cooking with his back turned, setting her plate on the table, then stepping outside while she ate. When he returned, he found her washing dishes, moving through the task with efficient grace. "I was thinking," he said, hanging his hat on the peg, "that maybe tomorrow we could start working on the garden. Get it cleared out properly, figure out where to plant what, if you're feeling up to it." "I'd like that." She dried the last dish and set it carefully in the cupboard. "I'd like that very much." They sat together in the sitting room as darkness fell, Wyatt in his chair by the fireplace, Evelyn on the sofa with her hands folded in her lap. He whittled absently at a piece of wood, letting the shavings fall into a small pile at his feet, while she sat in silence and watched the last light fade from the windows. After a while he began to hum, low and tuneless, just something to fill the quiet. It was an old habit from his solitary years, something he did without thinking. "What song is that?" she asked suddenly. He stopped, surprised. "I don't know that it's any song, just something I do. It's nice, peaceful. My mother used to hum while she worked. I guess I picked it up from her." He resumed the quiet melody. "She said it kept the loneliness away." "Does it work?" He considered. Sometimes, not always. No, she agreed softly. Not always. They lapsed back into silence, but it was a shared silence now, companionable rather than awkward. Outside, a coyote called, and another answered from across the valley. The wind picked up, rattling the shutters slightly, and Wyatt rose to check that everything was secured for the night. I should let you rest, he said finally. Tomorrow's going to be a full day if we're tackling that garden. She stood, smoothing her skirts. Wyatt? Yes? Thank you. For today. For... She gestured helplessly. For all of it. You don't need to thank me, Evelyn. This is just how it should be. She was quiet for a moment, then, maybe, but it's not how it's ever been before. She left him standing in the sitting room and he heard her bedroom door close softly. He remained where he was for a few minutes, staring at nothing, thinking about what she'd said. It's not how it's ever been before. What kind of life had she lived? What kind of treatment had she endured that basic kindness seemed like a gift? The questions haunted him as he prepared for bed, as he lay in the darkness listening to the night sounds. Somewhere in the house, Evelyn was doing the same, lying awake in an unfamiliar bed, in an unfamiliar house, with an unfamiliar husband just beyond the wall. He hoped she felt safe. He hoped she understood that he meant what he said about partnership, about respect, about building something together. But hope and reality weren't always the same thing, and he knew it would take more than words to prove himself to her. Time, he thought. It would take time, and patience, and the kind of steady, quiet persistence that had served him well in ranching, in weathering storms, in surviving loss. He could give her that. He would give her that, however long it took. The days that followed settled into a pattern, each one bleeding into the next with the rhythm of work and weather and gradual, cautious familiarity. They rose with the sun, worked through the morning heat, rested during the brutal afternoon hours, and resumed their tasks as evening brought relief. True to his word, Wyatt helped her clear and expand the garden, turning the hard earth with a spade while she followed behind, breaking up clods and removing rocks. They worked side by side in companionable silence, and occasionally she would point out where certain plants should go, explaining their needs with the confidence of someone who truly understood growing things. Tomatoes here, where they'll get full sun. Beans along this edge where they can climb the fence. Squash in the corner where they'll have room to spread. Herbs near the kitchen door for easy access. Her hands moved as she spoke, sketching patterns in the air. And here, right here, we should put marigolds. Marigolds? He leaned on the spade, curious. Those are flowers, not food. They keep pests away. Plant them around the vegetables and you'll have fewer problems with insects. She knelt in the dirt, her dress already dusty despite her attempts to keep it clean. My aunt taught me that. She said every garden needs beauty as well as bounty. Smart woman, your aunt. She was. Evelyn's voice softened. Stern, but fair. She took me in when no one else would. After... She stopped abruptly, and Wyatt knew better than to push. Instead, he just said, She sounds like someone I would have liked. You would have. She rose, brushing dirt from her gloves. She didn't judge people by their faces. She said character was the only thing worth measuring. I agree with her. They returned to work, and Wyatt found himself watching her when he thought she wasn't looking. The veil never came off, not even in the heat, not even when sweat dampened the fabric and made it cling to her face. She must have been suffocating under there, but she never complained, never gave any indication that she was uncomfortable. What would it take, he wondered, for her to trust him enough to remove it? In the evenings, after the work was done and supper had been eaten in their usual arrangement, him facing away, her dining in private, they would sit together in the sitting room. Wyatt had taken to reading aloud from the few books he owned, mostly because the silence sometimes felt too heavy, and he sensed that she needed the sound of his voice even if she didn't say so. She was an attentive listener, occasionally asking questions or making observations that revealed a sharp, educated mind. On the third evening, when he finished a chapter from a collection of Hawthorne's stories, she said quietly, You read well, better than most. I like stories. He closed the book and set it aside. Always have. When I was a boy, I used to sneak into my father's study and read by candlelight when I was supposed to be sleeping. Got caught more times than I can count. What did your father do when he caught you? Lectured me about wasting candles and neglecting my chores. He smiled at the memory. Then he'd leave a fresh candle on my nightstand the next day. Never said a word about it, but the message was clear. If you're going to disobey, at least don't burn the house down doing it. He heard her laugh, soft and genuine, and the sound made something in his chest loosen. Your father sounds like a good man. He was. Died when I was 19. Fever took him in less than a week. The old grief was there, familiar and dull. My mother followed 6 months later. Broken heart, the doctor said, though he wrote pneumonia on the death certificate. I'm sorry. It was a long time ago. He paused. But I think about them sometimes. Wonder what they'd make of all this. Of me, sending for a mail-order bride at my age. What do you think they'd say? He considered. My mother would say I waited too long to let myself be happy again. My father would say I was being practical, which in his book was the highest compliment. He glanced at her shadowed form on the sofa. What about your parents? You said you were orphaned young. She was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, my mother died giving birth to me. My father, he died in a factory fire when I was 6. After that, I went to live with my aunt in Boston. No siblings? No, just me. Her voice was flat, empty of emotion. Just me and my aunt until she died 3 years ago. Must have been lonely. Yes. The single word carried a weight of sorrow that made his throat tight. Yes, it was. They sat in silence after that, the shadows deepening around them, and Wyatt found himself wanting to offer comfort, but not knowing how. Physical touch was clearly out of the question, and words seemed inadequate to address the depth of loneliness he heard in her voice. So he did the only thing he could think of. He started humming again, that low, wordless melody that his mother had taught him, the one that was supposed to keep the loneliness at bay. After a moment, he heard Evelyn's breathing slow and deepen, heard the tension leave her body as she relaxed into the sofa. She didn't say anything, didn't thank him, but he knew she understood. Sometimes music said what words couldn't. By the end of the week, the garden was taking shape. Neat rows marked out with string, the soil turned and ready for planting. Wyatt had ridden into town alone on Thursday, returning with seeds and seedlings, a young milk cow named Bess, and an assortment of supplies that Evelyn had requested. He'd also picked up something else, something he kept hidden in his saddlebag until the right moment. That moment came on Friday evening, after supper, when he found Evelyn standing on the porch watching the sunset. She did that often, he'd noticed, stood very still, her face turned toward the fading light, as if she were trying to absorb every last bit of warmth before darkness fell. I got you something, he said, coming to stand beside her. In town. She turned and he thought he saw surprise in the tilt of her head. You didn't need to do that. I wanted to. He pulled out a small bundle wrapped in brown paper. It's not much, but I thought, well, here. She took the package with careful hands and unwrapped it slowly. Inside were 3 things: a new pair of work gloves in soft leather, a packet of marigold seeds, and a journal bound in dark blue cloth with blank pages waiting to be filled. Wyatt! Her voice broke on his name. The gloves are practical. Those ones you're wearing are falling apart. The seeds are for the garden. And the journal. He rubbed the back of his neck, suddenly self-conscious. You said you used to keep house accounts for your aunt. I thought maybe you'd like to keep track of things here too, or use it for whatever you want. Recipes, notes, thoughts, whatever. She stood frozen, staring down at the gifts, and he couldn't tell if she was pleased or upset or something else entirely. Then, slowly, she set the items on the porch rail and turned to him. No one's ever... She stopped, started again. In all my life, no one has ever given me gifts just because they wanted to, just to be kind. Well, that's a damn shame. He said it gruffly, uncomfortable with the emotion in her voice. You deserve kindness, Evelyn. You deserve a lot of things you probably haven't gotten. I don't know what I did to deserve you. The words stunned him into silence. Before he could formulate a response, she'd gathered up her gifts and hurried back into the house, leaving him standing alone on the porch in the gathering darkness. He stayed there for a long time, listening to the night sounds and trying to understand what had just happened. She'd seemed genuinely overwhelmed by such simple gifts, as if basic thoughtfulness was foreign to her. What kind of men had she known before him? What kind of life had taught her that she wasn't worthy of small kindnesses? The questions circled in his mind like vultures, and with them came a quiet, burning anger. Not at her, never at her, but at whoever had made her believe she was less than she was. But anger wouldn't help her. Only time would. Time and patience, and proving through 1,000 small actions that she was valued here, that she mattered, that she was more than whatever shame she carried beneath that veil. He could do that. He would do that, however long it took. That night, for the first time since her arrival, Wyatt found a note beside his breakfast plate the next morning. It was written in that same careful hand from her letters, and it said simply, "Thank you for seeing me when I cannot see myself. E." He read it 3 times, then carefully folded it and tucked it into his shirt pocket right over his heart. It stayed there all day as he worked, a small weight that reminded him that he wasn't alone anymore, that someone in this world was learning to trust him, and that maybe, just maybe, they were both beginning to heal. The note remained in Wyatt's pocket through the following week, growing soft with handling, the creases deepening each time he unfolded it to read those simple words again. He found himself reaching for it during quiet moments, while mending fence, while grooming the horses, while lying awake in the darkness listening to the wind test the corners of the house. Each time the message was the same, and each time it steadied something restless inside him. Thank you for seeing me when I cannot see myself. He'd never thought of himself as particularly perceptive, never considered that simply treating someone with basic decency could mean so much. But then again, he'd never met anyone like Evelyn before. Someone so fractured by the world that kindness felt like revelation. The garden flourished under her attention. Within days, neat rows of seedlings pushed through the dark earth, reaching toward the sun with the determined optimism of living things. She spent hours there each morning, kneeling in the dirt despite the heat, despite the veil that must have made every breath an effort. He'd watch her from a distance sometimes, noting the gentle way she handled each plant, the care she took with every task. She worked as if the garden were sacred ground, as if each seed planted was a prayer for something better. On the Saturday of their second week together, dark clouds began gathering over the western mountains just after dawn. Wyatt noticed them immediately, massive thunderheads building like castles in the sky, their underbellies bruised purple and black. The air felt heavy, charged with electricity that made his skin prickle and the horses nervous in their stalls. "Storm's coming," he announced at breakfast, forgetting to turn his back in his urgency. He caught himself immediately and pivoted away, but not before seeing her stiffen at the sudden movement. "Sorry, didn't mean to startle you." "It's all right." Her voice was steady, but he heard the slight tremor underneath. "How bad will it be?" "Hard to say. Could be just rain, could be—" He hesitated, not wanting to frighten her. "Could be rough. We get some violent weather out here this time of year, wind that'll take the roof off if you're not prepared." "What do we need to do?" He appreciated the "we" more than she probably knew. "Secure everything that can blow away. Bring the chickens into the barn. Make sure the shutters are latched tight. Check the livestock." He grabbed his hat from the peg. "I'll handle the outside work. You take care of the house. Fill every container we have with water from the well, just in case. Move anything valuable away from the windows. And if it gets bad, I mean really bad, you get into the root cellar and stay there until I come for you. Understand?" "Yes, but what about you?" "I'll be fine. I've weathered plenty of storms." "Wyatt, the animals need tending, Evelyn. Can't just leave them to panic." He settled the hat on his head. "I know what I'm doing. Just promise me you'll get to safety if things go sideways." She was silent for a moment, then, "I promise if you promise." "Fair enough." He allowed himself a small smile, even though she couldn't see it. "Fair enough." By mid-morning, the temperature had dropped 20 degrees and the wind had picked up, gusting hard enough to rattle the shutters and send dust devils spinning across the yard. Wyatt worked steadily, moving from task to task with practiced efficiency. He secured the barn doors, reinforced the chicken coop, brought in tools and equipment that could become projectiles in high wind. The cattle had already moved to the sheltered side of the hills, following their instincts to find protection. Inside the house, Evelyn filled buckets and basins with water, moved furniture, checked and rechecked the shutters. He could see her through the window, moving with quick purpose, and felt a surge of gratitude that she wasn't the type to dissolve into hysterics. She was steady, strong. Despite everything that frightened her, despite the veil and the secrets and the shame, she was fundamentally brave. The first raindrops fell just before noon, fat and heavy, striking the dust with audible impacts. Within minutes, it was a downpour, sheets of water driven almost horizontal by the wind. Thunder rolled across the valley like artillery fire, and lightning split the darkened sky with brilliant white cracks that left afterimages on his vision. Wyatt was in the barn, calming the horses. They hated storms, always had, when he heard it. A sound like a train approaching, low and ominous, building in volume until it drowned out even the thunder. Wind, serious wind. He just started toward the barn doors when they exploded inward, one hinge tearing loose completely. The wind howled through the opening like a living thing, sending hay swirling, making the horses scream in terror. And in that wind he heard something else, a crack, sharp and definite, followed by a groan of stressed timber. The roof. He looked up just as a section of it tore away, exposing the loft to the driving rain. Water poured in immediately, and with it came more wind, more chaos. The horses were wild now, throwing themselves against their stall doors, eyes rolling white with fear. "Easy!" he shouted, knowing they couldn't hear him over the storm. "Easy, damn it!" He lunged for the nearest stall. Thunder, his oldest gelding, the one who'd carried him through more miles than he could count, and managed to get the door open. The horse bolted immediately, nearly trampling him in its panic to escape the collapsing barn. He let it go, turned to the next stall, but the mare inside was beyond reason, slamming herself against the walls hard enough to splinter wood. Another crack overhead, more roof peeling away. He could see the sky now through the growing hole, could see debris flying past like leaves in autumn. This wasn't just a storm anymore. This was something catastrophic. He got the second stall open, then the third, focusing on getting the animals out before the whole structure came down. The wind screamed through the barn, ripping at his clothes, stealing his breath. Rain lashed his face, cold and sharp as needles. Above him, the remaining roof groaned ominously. He'd just reached for the latch on the fourth stall when he heard a voice, thin and nearly lost in the chaos, but unmistakably human. "Wyatt!" He spun around to find Evelyn in the barn entrance, her dress plastered to her body by the rain, her veil hanging in wet tatters. She was holding onto the doorframe with both hands, fighting against the wind that threatened to tear her away. "Get back to the house!" he roared. "Get to the cellar! The horses! I've got them! Go!" But she didn't go. Instead, she let go of the doorframe and fought her way into the barn, staggering against the wind, her hands outstretched. She was coming toward the stalls, toward the animals that were still trapped, and he realized with a jolt of fear and amazement that she wasn't running from danger. She was running toward it. "Evelyn, no!" She ignored him, or maybe couldn't hear him over the storm. She reached the stall that held the youngest horse, Dancer, barely 3 years old, and began struggling with the latch. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely work it, but she didn't give up, didn't retreat. Overhead, something gave with a sound like a gunshot. He looked up and saw a massive beam beginning to fall, saw it rotating in what seemed like slow motion, saw exactly where it was going to land, right on top of Evelyn. He didn't think, didn't plan, just moved, throwing himself across the space between them, hitting her with his shoulder and driving them both to the side. They went down hard in the mud and sodden hay, and he tried to cover her with his body, tried to shield her from what was coming. The beam crashed down where she'd been standing a second before, missing them by inches. It struck the edge of the stall door with a force that shook the ground, and in the impact, something else came loose. A section of tin roofing, sharp-edged and spinning, carried on the wind like a blade. Wyatt saw it coming. Tried to duck. Wasn't quite fast enough. The metal caught Evelyn's shoulder, tearing through fabric, and he heard her scream, a sound of pure shock and pain that cut through the storm. The tin kept going, embedding itself in a support post with a resonant thunk, but the damage was done. Evelyn. He scrambled to his feet, reaching for her, and in the chaos and the rain and the panic, His hand found her veil and knocked it loose. It fell away. For one endless moment, the world seemed to freeze despite the chaos raging around them. He saw her face, truly saw it, for the first time. The scar ran from her right temple down across her cheek to her jaw, a twisted rope of old burn tissue that had healed badly, pulling the skin tight and leaving it pale and puckered. It was extensive, severe, the kind of injury that spoke of terrible pain and worse trauma. But it was also just a scar, just damage to skin. Nothing monstrous, nothing hideous, just evidence that she had survived something that should have killed her. And beneath the scar he saw the rest of her face, the delicate bone structure, the dark eyes wide with shock and fear, the mouth twisted now in pain. She was beautiful, he realized with a start, not despite the scar but including it, because every line of her face spoke of strength and survival and a refusal to surrender even when the world had tried its best to break her. She stared up at him, rain streaming down her exposed face, her eyes filled with horror that had nothing to do with the storm. "Don't look at me," she cried, her voice raw. "Don't look at me!" She tried to cover her face with her hands, but her right arm wouldn't cooperate properly. Blood was seeping through her torn sleeve, and her face had gone white beneath the scar. "Evelyn, you're hurt. Don't look at me!" She was sobbing now, great gasping sobs that shook her whole body. "I'm ugly. I'm hideous. Don't—" He did the only thing he could think of. He shrugged out of his coat, already soaked but better than nothing, and draped it over her head and shoulders, covering her face, giving her back the shield she needed. "Can you stand?" he asked, his voice rough but gentle. She nodded, still crying, and he helped her to her feet. The wind was still screaming, the rain still falling in torrents, but the worst of the storm seemed to be moving past. Thunder rumbled in the distance, retreating like a defeated army. "Come on," he said, let's get you inside." He guided her out of the ruined barn, one arm around her waist to support her weight, the other holding the coat over her head. They staggered through the mud and debris, past the panicked chickens that had scattered everywhere, past fallen branches and sheets of torn metal. The house at least still stood, its thick adobe walls unmoved by the wind that had destroyed everything else. Inside, he settled her on the sofa and gently removed the coat from her head. She immediately tried to turn away, tried to hide her face, but he caught her hands, carefully, respectfully, and held them still. "Evelyn, look at me." "No, please, no. Look at me." She slowly, reluctantly turned her face toward his. Tears streamed down her cheeks, mixing with the rainwater, and her eyes were full of such shame and fear that it made his chest ache. He looked at her, really looked at her, taking in every detail of that scarred face, and said quietly, "I need to see your shoulder. You're bleeding." "Wyatt? You think I care about a scar?" The words came out more forcefully than he'd intended. "You ran into a collapsing barn in the middle of a windstorm to save animals that weren't even yours yet. You could have been killed. You almost were killed." His voice softened. "You are the bravest person I've ever known, and a scar doesn't change that. Nothing changes that." She stared at him, her mouth opening and closing without sound, as if she couldn't quite process what he was saying. "Now," he said, releasing her hands and standing up, "I'm going to get the medical kit and some clean water. I need to look at that wound. Can you manage your dress, or do you need help?" I can manage? Good. I'll be right back." He left her there and went to gather supplies, giving her a moment of privacy to collect herself. His own hands were shaking, he realized, not from fear or exhaustion, but from the raw emotion of the last few minutes. He thought he was going to watch her die, thought that beam was going to crush her, that she'd be gone before he could reach her, that he'd lose someone else to violence and chance and the cruel randomness of the world. But she was alive, hurt, terrified, exposed, but alive. When he returned to the sitting room, she'd managed to work her dress down enough to expose her right shoulder. The wound wasn't as bad as he'd feared, a deep gash about 4 inches long, bleeding freely but not arterial. It would need stitches, but she'd survive. He set the medical kit on the table and began preparing clean cloths, carbolic solution, a needle, and thread. She watched him work, her face still uncovered, still exposed, as if she'd given up trying to hide. "This is going to hurt," he warned. "I'll be as gentle as I can, but—" "I know." Her voice was flat, empty. I've been hurt before. The word sent a chill down his spine. Evelyn, just do it. Please. Just get it over with. He cleaned the wound first, watching her face as he worked. She flinched at the sting of the carbolic but didn't cry out, didn't pull away. She just sat there, staring at nothing, her jaw clenched so tight he could see the muscle jumping beneath her skin. Where did the scar come from? He asked quietly, partly to distract her and partly because he genuinely wanted to know. She was silent for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, "A fire. When I was 16. What happened?" There was a boy, a little boy, maybe 5 years old. He'd wandered into the old church on the edge of town, the one they were going to tear down. Kids did that sometimes, dared each other to go inside, said it was haunted. She drew a shaky breath. Someone had been burning trash in there, left embers smoldering. By the time anyone noticed, the whole building was engulfed. He threaded the needle, preparing for the stitches, but kept his attention on her words. I was walking past, heard him screaming inside. Everyone else just stood there, watching it burn, saying it was too late, saying no one could survive in there. But I could hear him. Her voice cracked. I could hear him screaming for his mother. So you went in. So I went in. She said it simply, without pride or self-congratulation. I found him near the altar, trapped behind a pew that had fallen. I got him out, got him to the door. Someone grabbed him from me, pulled him to safety. But then, she gestured vaguely at her face. Part of the roof came down, burning timber. It caught my face, my hair. I remember the smell more than the pain at first. Later, there was plenty of pain. Wyatt began stitching, his hands steady despite the rage building in his chest. Not at her, never at her, but at the injustice of what came next. He could already guess. The boy lived, she continued, staring at the wall. Fully recovered. His parents came to visit me once while I was healing, brought me flowers, thanked me. Then they stopped coming. Everyone stopped coming. I'd saved their son, but I'd become... She touched the scar lightly. I'd become this. Something unpleasant to look at. Something that made people uncomfortable. That's despicable. That's human nature. She didn't sound bitter, just tired. People forget who saved who. They forget the brave thing and only remember the uncomfortable aftermath. Within a year, I was that poor disfigured girl. Within 2 years, I was just the monster from the fire. He finished the last stitch and tied it off carefully, then reached for a clean bandage. The only monsters I see are the people who treated you that way. You don't understand. No, you don't understand. He secured the bandage and moved to sit on the edge of the table, facing her directly. You saved a child's life. You ran into fire, because you heard someone in pain and couldn't stand by and do nothing. That scar isn't something to be ashamed of. It's proof that when it mattered most, you chose courage over safety. You chose someone else's life over your own comfort. He leaned forward, holding her gaze. That makes you extraordinary, Evelyn. Not ugly, not hideous. Extraordinary. The tears came again, silent now, tracking down her face. No one's ever said that before. Then everyone you've known before was a damn fool. She made a sound between a laugh and a sob. You're supposed to be repulsed. You're supposed to want to send me away, to demand your money back, to... Well, I'm not repulsed. I don't want to send you away, and I sure as hell don't want my money back. He stood up and moved to look out the window at the devastation outside. The storm had passed, leaving destruction in its wake. The barn roof half gone, debris everywhere, animals scattered across the valley. What I want is to clean up this mess. What I want is to make sure you're comfortable and that wound doesn't get infected. And what I want is for you to stop thinking that your worth as a person is determined by what you look like. He turned back to face her. You're more than a scar, Evelyn. You're more than whatever damage was done to you. You're brave and you're kind and you're honest, and those are the things that matter. The rest is just... He gestured vaguely. Just decoration. Some people have it, some don't. It doesn't mean anything in the long run. She was staring at him as if he'd grown a second head. How can you say that? How can you look at me and not see... I see exactly what's there, he interrupted. I see a woman who's been through hell and came out the other side. I see someone who works hard and doesn't complain. I see someone who cares about a garden and chickens and whether the coffee is strong enough in the morning. He paused. I see my wife. That's what I see. The word wife seemed to hit her physically. She closed her eyes, more tears escaping, and wrapped her arms around herself. I don't know how to believe you. Then don't. Not yet. He moved toward the kitchen. Just give it time. Let me prove it to you through actions instead of words. Can you do that? I can try. That's all I'm asking. He left her sitting there and went to assess the damage outside. The barn would need extensive repairs, maybe a complete roof replacement. The chicken coop had survived better than expected, though the birds themselves were scattered to hell and gone. He'd have to spend the rest of the day rounding them up, calming the horses, making sure nothing was actively dangerous. But they'd survived. They were both alive, both mostly intact, and that was more than many people could say after a storm like that. As he worked through the afternoon, gathering chickens, coaxing horses back from wherever they'd fled, salvaging what he could from the barn, his mind kept returning to that moment when her veil had fallen away, to the look in her eyes, the terror and shame and desperate vulnerability, to the scar that she believed defined her entire existence. She was wrong. So profoundly wrong, it made him angry. But he also understood that you couldn't argue someone out of shame, couldn't logic away years of cruel treatment and casual cruelty. The only way forward was through days and weeks and months of treating her like the valuable person she was, until maybe, eventually, she started to believe it herself. He could do that, would do that, however long it took. When he finally returned to the house as the sun was setting, he found Evelyn in the kitchen with her veil back in place. She'd changed into a clean dress and was attempting to make supper one-handed, her injured arm held carefully against her side. You should be resting, he said gently. I need to do something. I can't just sit. He understood that impulse intimately. All right, but let me help. They worked together in careful silence, moving around each other with the familiarity of people who'd shared space long enough to anticipate each other's movements. She didn't speak about what had happened, didn't acknowledge that he'd seen her face, and he didn't push. When it was time to eat, he turned his back as usual, giving her the privacy to lift her veil. Some things, he was learning, couldn't be rushed. That night, as he lay in bed listening to the house settle and the wind die down to nothing, he heard her door open quietly. He tensed, wondering if something was wrong, if her wound was bothering her, if she needed help. Soft footsteps in the hallway. A pause outside his door. Then, so quietly, he almost missed it. Thank you. Before he could respond, the footsteps retreated, and her door closed again. He stared at the ceiling in the darkness, that small word echoing in his mind. Thank you. Thank you for not being disgusted. Thank you for calling me brave. Thank you for seeing me. He didn't sleep much that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that beam falling, saw the tin roofing spinning through the air, saw how close he'd come to losing her before he'd really had a chance to know her. The thought terrified him more than he wanted to admit. Somewhere in the past 2 weeks, Evelyn Mercer had stopped being just a mail-order bride, stopped being just a solution to loneliness. She'd become important, necessary, someone whose presence had changed the entire character of his life, who made the house feel like a home instead of a tomb. He couldn't lose that, couldn't lose her, which meant he needed to be more careful, needed to think ahead, needed to make sure she was safe even when danger came without warning. But more than that, he needed to help her see herself the way he saw her, not as damaged goods, not as something to be pitied or feared, but as someone extraordinary wearing a scar like a badge of honor. It wouldn't be easy. She'd spent years believing the lies that cruel people had told her, years thinking that her appearance defined her worth. But he had time. They both did. And he would use every day of it to prove to her that she was wrong about herself, that she was brave and valuable and worthy of love, even if, especially if, she couldn't see it yet. Morning came with a clarity that felt almost cruel after the violence of the storm. The sky stretched blue and endless, innocent as a child's eyes, giving no hint of the chaos it had unleashed just hours before. Wyatt woke to birdsong and the familiar creak of the windmill, and for a disoriented moment he wondered if he'd dreamed it all. The collapsing barn, the falling beam, Evelyn's face finally revealed in rain and terror. Then he heard her moving in the kitchen, heard the careful one-handed clatter of dishes being set out, and he knew it had been real. All of it. He dressed quickly and found her at the stove, still veiled, her right arm cradled against her body. She'd managed to start the fire and get coffee brewing, but he could see the strain in the set of her shoulders, the way she moved with careful deliberation to avoid jarring her injury. "You should have woken me," he said quietly. "I could have done this. I'm not helpless." Her voice was steady but distant, as if she'd retreated somewhere deep inside herself where his words from yesterday couldn't reach. "Never said you were. But you're hurt, and there's no shame in accepting help when you need it." She didn't respond, just continued her awkward one-handed work at the stove. He let it go, understanding that she needed time to process what had happened, needed space to rebuild whatever walls had come down in the storm. They ate breakfast in their usual arrangement, him facing away, her dining in privacy. But the silence felt different now. Heavier. Charged with everything that had been said and everything that remained unspoken. When the meal was finished and the dishes cleared, Wyatt pushed back from the table and said, "I need to go into town today." She went very still. "Why?" "Need to order lumber and supplies for the barn. Can't put it off." He paused. "Also need to let Doc Harrison know about your shoulder. Make sure it's healing properly. You might want to check those stitches in a few days." "I'm fine." "Evelyn, I said I'm fine." Her voice was sharper now, edged with something that sounded like panic. "You can't tell anyone what happened. You can't tell them you saw that I'm not going to announce it in the town square," he said gently. "But the doc needs to know you were injured in the storm. That's just practical." And when he asks how, when he wants to examine the wound, when people start asking questions about why I needed medical attention, her breathing had quickened, and he could see her hands trembling at her sides. "They'll want to know everything. They'll want details. Hey." He stood up slowly, keeping his movements obvious and non-threatening. "Nobody's going to force you to do anything you don't want to do. If you don't want Doc Harrison to see your face, we'll figure something else out. We'll manage the wound ourselves, change the dressings, watch for infection. It'll be fine." You don't understand what it's like." Her voice broke. "You don't know what people say, how they look at you, the way they whisper when they think you can't hear. Monster. Cursed. God's punishment. I've heard it all, Wyatt, every variation of disgust and pity and morbid curiosity, and I can't go through that again." He wanted to cross the room to her, wanted to offer physical comfort, but he held himself back. She was like a wild animal right now, poised for flight, and any sudden movement might send her bolting. "All right," he said quietly. "All right, you don't have to go anywhere. You don't have to see anyone. I'll handle the town, and we'll take care of your shoulder here. Does that work?" She nodded jerkily, and he saw her shoulders drop slightly with relief. "But Evelyn?" He waited until she turned toward him. "Eventually you're going to have to face people. You live here now. This is your home. You can't spend the rest of your life hiding in this house. Why not?" The question came out bitter and defeated. "What's out there for me except more cruelty? More people who see me as something broken and wrong?" "Maybe nothing," he admitted. "Maybe everyone in Dry Creek is exactly as small-minded as you fear, but maybe not. Maybe there are people out there who'll surprise you, who'll see past the scar to who you really are. That's a lot of maybes. It's all any of us have." He reached for his hat. "I'll be back by evening. There's fresh water in the pitcher, bread in the pantry, and please, for the love of God, don't try to do any heavy work with that arm. Just rest, read, sit on the porch. Let yourself heal." "Wyatt?" She stopped him as he reached for the door. "Be careful. Please." The concern in her voice made something warm bloom in his chest. "Always am." The ride into Dry Creek took longer than usual. He had to navigate around fallen branches and debris from the storm, and twice he had to dismount and clear the road himself before he could continue. The landscape looked raw and scoured, as if the storm had stripped away some essential layer and left everything exposed and vulnerable. He knew the feeling. Town was buzzing with activity when he arrived. people assessing damage, making repairs, sharing stories about the storm. The general store had lost part of its awning, and several windows along the main street had been shattered by flying debris. But overall, Dry Creek had fared better than his ranch. The buildings were sturdier, more protected by the surrounding hills. "Carver!" Miller called from the doorway of his store. "Heard you got hit pretty hard out your way. Barn took damage?" "Roof's half gone," Wyatt confirmed, dismounting and tying his horse to the rail. "Need to order lumber and tin, probably a few 100 feet of it." Miller whistled low. "That's not cheap." "Can't leave it as is. Animals need shelter, and another storm like that would finish the job." They spent the next 20 minutes going over specifications and prices, with Miller making notes in his ledger. Wyatt tried to focus on the practical matters at hand, but his mind kept drifting back to the ranch, to Evelyn alone in the house with her injured shoulder and her wounded pride. "Your new wife settling in all right?" Miller asked casually, but Wyatt heard the curiosity underneath. "Haven't seen her around since she arrived." "She's settling fine." "Still wearing that veil, I suppose?" Wyatt's jaw tightened. "Don't see how that's anyone's business but hers." "Now don't get prickly, just making conversation." Miller held up his hands in mock surrender. "Though folks are curious, you have to admit, woman shows up covered head to toe, never comes to town, never shows her face, it gets people talking." "Let them talk." Wyatt pulled out his wallet and counted bills onto the counter. "She's my wife, and she's entitled to her privacy. Anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me directly." Miller's eyebrows rose at the steel in his tone, but he was smart enough to drop the subject. "Lumber should arrive end of next week. I'll send word when it's ready." "Appreciated." Wyatt was heading back to his horse when he heard a familiar voice call his name. He turned to find Doc Harrison approaching, his medical bag in hand and concern etched on his weathered face. "Wyatt, glad I caught you. Heard about the damage at your place." The doctor was in his 60s, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, one of the few people in Dry Creek that Wyatt genuinely respected. "Everyone all right? You and your new bride?" "We're fine. Some bruises, some cuts from debris, but nothing serious." "Heard the barn nearly came down on you." "Close call, but we managed." Wyatt shifted his weight, uncomfortable with the attention. "Animals all scattered, but I've rounded up most of them." Harrison studied him with the penetrating gaze of someone trained to see beneath surfaces. "And your wife? She holding up all right? Storm like that can be frightening for someone new to the territory." "She's tougher than she looks. I'd like to meet her sometime. Officially, I mean. Make sure she knows where to find me if she needs medical attention." The doctor paused. "I understand she's private. That's fine, but I want her to know she's welcome in my office anytime. No questions asked, no judgment rendered." Wyatt felt something loosen in his chest. "I'll tell her. Thank you, Doc." "We take care of our own out here, Wyatt, even the ones who prefer to keep to themselves." Harrison clapped him on the shoulder. "You need anything, you let me know." As Wyatt rode back toward the ranch, he found himself thinking about the doctor's words. "We take care of our own." Maybe there was hope yet that Dry Creek could become a real home for Evelyn, a place where she didn't have to hide all the time. But hope and reality were different things, and he knew it would take more than one kind doctor to overcome years of cruelty and rejection. The ranch looked lonely when he crested the final rise, the damaged barn standing like a wounded soldier against the afternoon sky. But smoke rose from the chimney, and he could see Evelyn moving past a window, and that simple evidence of life and occupation made the whole place feel less desolate. He stabled his horse and was heading toward the house when something caught his eye, a pile of fabric on the porch railing, fluttering slightly in the breeze. He moved closer and felt his breath catch. It was Evelyn's wedding dress, the one she'd worn when she stepped off the stage 2 weeks ago. The storm had torn it badly. The hem was shredded, one sleeve nearly ripped free, mud stains darkening the blue fabric. She must have set it out to, what? Throw away? Burn? The thought of that dress being destroyed, of that last tangible connection to her old life being erased, bothered him more than he could articulate. It seemed like giving up, like an admission that nothing could be salvaged or repaired. Before he could second-guess the impulse, he gathered up the dress and carried it inside. Evelyn looked up from the sofa where she'd been reading, her eyes widening behind the veil when she saw what he was carrying. "What are you doing with that?" "Saw it on the porch." He laid it carefully across the table. "Were you planning to throw it away?" "It's ruined. Look at it." She gestured with her good hand. "There's no salvaging that kind of damage." "Maybe not completely, but I could try." The words came out before he'd fully thought them through. She stared at him. A rat. "You want to mend my dress? Why not?" "Because you're a rancher, not a seamstress. Because it's women's work. Because it's—" She stopped, seeming to realize how absurd her protest sounded. "Because it matters," he finished quietly. "This dress, it's the one you wore when you took the biggest risk of your life. When you traveled halfway across the country to marry a stranger. When you chose hope over despair even though you were terrified." He touched the torn fabric gently. "That deserves to be preserved, not thrown away." "Wyatt, Her voice was thick with emotion. "I don't understand you." "Nothing to understand. I just think—" He paused, searching for the right words. "I think we're too quick to throw away things that are damaged, too ready to believe that what's broken can't be fixed. But sometimes, with patience and effort, you can make something beautiful out of something that's been hurt." The silence that followed was profound. He could hear her breathing, quick and shallow, and he wondered if he'd gone too far, said too much, exposed his intentions too clearly. Then, softly, "I don't know how to sew very well. My aunt tried to teach me, but I was never good at delicate work." "Well, I'm probably worse, but we can learn together." He smiled even though she couldn't see it. "Might take a while. Might look rough when we're done, but it'll be ours. Something we fixed together." "You're serious about this?" "Dead serious." She was quiet for a long moment, and he could almost hear her thinking, weighing, trying to understand what he was really offering. Finally she said, "There's a sewing kit in the trunk in my room. Needles, thread, scissors. I brought it from Boston but haven't used it yet." "I'll get it." He found the kit exactly where she said, a small wooden box with brass hinges filled with the implements of mending. When he returned to the sitting room, Evelyn had spread the dress out on the table and was examining the damage with a critical eye. "The hem can be shortened to remove the worst of the tearing," she said, her voice taking on the focused tone of someone solving a problem. "The mud stains probably won't come out completely, but we can wash it and see." "The sleeve?" She touched it carefully. "The sleeve will need to be reattached entirely. That's the hardest part." "Then that's where we'll start." He pulled up a chair beside her. "Show me what to do." They worked through the afternoon and into the evening, their heads bent close over the damaged fabric. Evelyn gave instructions in her quiet, precise way, and Wyatt followed them as best he could with his large, work-roughened hands that were better suited to holding reins than needles. He stabbed himself more times than he could count, cursed under his breath with each missed stitch, but he kept at it with the same patient determination he brought to breaking horses or mending fences. Slowly, painfully, the sleeve began to come together again. His stitches were crude compared to Evelyn's neat, even work, but they held. They would serve. "You're getting better," she observed after an hour, and he thought he heard approval in her voice. "Still looks like a drunk spider walked across the fabric." That earned him a small laugh, and the sound made all the finger pricks worthwhile. As the light faded and they had to move closer to the lamp to see, Wyatt found himself acutely aware of her proximity, the warmth of her beside him, the soft sound of her breathing, the way her hands moved with careful grace despite her injured shoulder. This was intimacy, he realized. Not the physical kind that people usually thought of when they heard the word, but something deeper, two people working together toward a common goal, learning each other's rhythms, building something through shared effort. This was partnership. "Wyatt?" She'd stopped sewing and was looking at him, or at least facing him. "Why are you doing this? Really?" He set down his needle and thread, considering how to answer. He could deflect, could make a joke, could retreat into casual explanations. But she'd asked for honesty, and honesty was what he'd promised. "Because you deserve to have someone in your corner," he said finally. "Someone who sees your worth and refuses to let you forget it. Someone who will fight for you even when you can't fight for yourself." He gestured at the dress. "This, mending this dress, It's not really about the dress at all. It's about showing you that damage doesn't mean worthless, that something can be torn and stained and still be precious, that you can survive terrible things and still deserve care and kindness and... He stopped, suddenly self-conscious. And what? She prompted softly. And love, he finished quietly. Even if that's not what we have yet, even if we never get there, you still deserve it. He heard her breath catch, saw her hand still over the fabric. When she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. No one's ever said anything like that to me before. Then everyone you've known before was blind and stupid. She made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. You keep saying things like that. Keep acting like I'm something valuable, like I matter. You do matter. Why is that so hard to believe? Because everyone else in my life has told me the opposite. The words burst out of her with sudden violence. Because every time I dared to hope, every time I thought maybe someone could see past the scar, I was proven wrong. Do you know what it's like to save a child's life and then be treated like a monster because of the way you looked afterward? Do you know what it's like to have people cross the street to avoid you? To hear mothers warn their children not to stare at the ugly woman? To be denied work and companionship and basic human kindness because your face doesn't meet their standards? She was standing now, pacing, her injured arm forgotten in her agitation. I've been spat on, called cursed, had people make signs against evil when I walked past. I've had priests tell me my suffering was God's will, that my scars were punishment for sins I didn't even commit. I've had men proposition me with the assumption that I'd be grateful for any attention at all, no matter how degrading. And through it all, I had to smile and pretend it didn't hurt, had to accept it as the price of being different, of being damaged. She turned to face him, and even through the veil, he could feel the intensity of her gaze. So yes, Wyatt Carver, it's hard to believe you when you say I matter, because accepting that means accepting that everyone else was wrong, that I've spent years believing lies about myself, that I've let other people's cruelty define who I am, and if I accept that... Her voice broke. If I accept that, then I have to face how much time I've wasted hating myself for something that wasn't my fault. The raw pain in her words hit him like a physical blow. He stood slowly, keeping his distance but making sure she could see that he was listening, that he heard every word. You're right, he said quietly. Everyone else was wrong, profoundly, cruelly wrong. And yes, you did waste time believing lies. But that's not your fault either. When enough people tell you the same lie often enough, it starts to feel like truth. When the whole world treats you like you're worthless, it's almost impossible not to internalize that. He paused. But here's the thing. You don't have to keep believing it. You can choose right now to start believing something different, to start seeing yourself the way I see you. And how do you see me? The question came out as a challenge. As someone brave enough to run into fire for a stranger, as someone who crossed a continent to start over, as someone who works hard and speaks honestly and cares about gardens and chickens and whether the coffee's strong enough. He took a careful step closer. As someone who deserves every good thing this world has to offer and who I count myself lucky to know. She stood frozen, and he could see her trembling. I don't know how to believe that. Then let me believe it for both of us until you can believe it yourself. The words hung in the air between them, and for a long moment, neither of them moved. Then slowly, Evelyn reached up and touched the veil covering her face. Her fingers lingered there, hesitating, trembling. What if... She stopped, started again. What if I'm never able to believe it? What if I'm too broken to be fixed? Then we'll work on it together, for as long as it takes. He gestured at the dress on the table. Just like this. One stitch at a time, one day at a time. Until slowly, gradually, the damage is repaired and something whole emerges. She lowered her hand from the veil and turned back to the table. When she spoke again, her voice was steadier. We should finish the sleeve before the light gets worse. They returned to their work, and the silence that settled over them now felt different. Not comfortable exactly, but less fraught. As if something had been acknowledged, and if not resolved, at least brought into the light where it could be examined. They worked until late into the night, until Wyatt's eyes burned from staring at tiny stitches and his fingers were cramped from holding the needle. But when they finally set the work aside, the sleeve was reattached, the hem was shortened and restitched, and the dress looked decidedly better than it had that morning. It's not perfect, Evelyn said, running her fingers over the visible repairs. You can see where it was damaged. Maybe that's not a bad thing. Wyatt stretched his sore back. Maybe the repairs are part of the story now. Evidence that something broken can be made whole again, even if the scars still show. She was quiet for a moment, then, "Are we still talking about the dress?" "Maybe, maybe not." He smiled tiredly. "I'm too exhausted to be subtle at this point." "Wyatt?" She gathered up the dress carefully, holding it against her chest. "Thank you. For this. For all of it. You're welcome." He watched her carry the dress to her room, watched her door close softly, and felt a profound sense of accomplishment that had nothing to do with stitching and everything to do with the small, tentative steps they'd taken toward understanding each other. The next morning, he woke to find the dress hanging on the porch railing again, but this time it had been washed and dried, and despite the visible repairs, it looked almost presentable. And beside it, someone had placed a small hand-carved sign that he'd made years ago and forgotten about. He'd found it in the workshop the night before while looking for better light, and on impulse had brought it inside to clean up. The sign read, in letters he'd burned into the wood with careful attention, "Home is where the brave heart dwells." He'd made it for Margaret, back in those early hopeful days of their marriage. After she died, he'd put it away, unable to bear looking at it. But now, seeing it there beside Evelyn's mended dress, it felt right somehow, like reclaiming something that had been lost. When Evelyn emerged for breakfast, she saw the sign immediately. She stopped on the threshold, one hand reaching out to touch it lightly. "Did you put this here?" she asked quietly. "Found it last night. Thought it belonged. Home is where the brave heart dwells." She traced the letters with one finger. "Is that what this place is now?" "Home." "Getting there," he said. "For both of us." She was quiet for a long moment, her hand still resting on the sign. Then, so softly he almost missed it. "Yes, it is." That afternoon, while Wyatt was working on clearing debris from around the barn, he heard the sound of a wagon approaching. He looked up to find old Mrs. Henderson from town, driving her husband's buckboard with a covered basket beside her on the seat. She pulled to a stop in front of the house and climbed down with the stiff movements of someone whose joints didn't work as well as they used to. "Mr. Carver, hope I'm not intruding." "Mrs. Henderson." He approached warily, removing his work gloves. The woman was notorious for gossip, and he couldn't imagine what had brought her all the way out here. "What can I do for you?" "Actually, I came to see your wife, if she's available." Wyatt felt his shoulders tense. "Why?" "Now, don't get defensive. I'm not here to cause trouble." She lifted the basket from the wagon. "Heard about the storm damage, and I know what it's like to be new in a place and dealing with disaster. Thought I'd bring by some food and see if there's anything she needs." He studied her face, looking for signs of mockery or cruel curiosity, but found only genuine concern. "That's kind of you." "It's what neighbors do." She hesitated. "I also wanted to apologize. For the gossip when she first arrived. For the way people talked. It was unkind, and I should have said something to stop it." Wyatt felt his estimation of the woman rise considerably. "I appreciate that, Mrs. Henderson, but Evelyn, my wife, she's very private. She might not want—" The door opened behind him, and Evelyn stepped out onto the porch. She was veiled, as always, her posture rigid with tension, but she'd come out. She'd chosen to face this. "Mrs. Henderson," she said, her voice steady despite what Wyatt knew must be significant fear. "That's very kind of you to visit." "Mrs. Carver." The older woman's voice was warm, respectful. "I hope I'm not intruding. Just wanted to bring by some food and welcome you properly to Dry Creek. Should have done it 2 weeks ago, but—" She shrugged. "Better late than never, I suppose." Evelyn descended the porch steps carefully, and Wyatt saw her hands trembling slightly at her sides. "Would you like some coffee? I just made a fresh pot." "I'd love some, dear, thank you." Wyatt watched in amazement as the two women disappeared into the house, Mrs. Henderson chatting easily about the storm damage in town, and Evelyn responding with cautious politeness. He stood in the yard, covered in dust and sawdust, feeling like he'd just witnessed something miraculous. Evelyn had faced someone from town. had invited them into their home, had chosen courage over fear. It was a small step, but it was a step forward. He returned to his work with renewed energy, and when Mrs. Henderson finally emerged an hour later, she was smiling. "Your wife is a lovely woman, Mr. Carver, very knowledgeable about gardens and such. I invited her to the church social next month, and she said she'd think about it." The woman climbed back into her wagon. "Take care of that one. She's special." "I know," Wyatt said quietly. "I know she is, as Mrs. That." Henderson's wagon disappeared down the road. Wyatt found Evelyn standing in the doorway, her hand raised in a small wave that the older woman probably couldn't even see. "You all right?" he asked gently. "I think so." She sounded surprised. She was kind, really kind. She didn't ask about the veil, didn't push, didn't treat me like a curiosity. Evelyn's voice wavered. "She just treated me like a person." "Because you are a person." He climbed the porch steps to stand beside her. "One who's braver than she gives herself credit for." "I was terrified." "I know, but you did it anyway. That's what brave means." She leaned against the porch rail, and he thought he saw her shoulders shake slightly. "Wyatt, that sign you put up, the one about brave hearts and home?" "Yes?" "I think you should put it on the front of the house, where everyone can see it." He understood what she was really saying, that she was claiming this place, this life, this new beginning, that she was choosing to be brave even when it terrified her. "I'll do that," he said quietly. "First thing tomorrow." That evening, as they worked together on the final repairs to the dress, Wyatt found himself thinking about how far they'd both come in just 2 weeks. From strangers united by loneliness and desperation to something that felt almost like a true partnership. They still had a long way to go. She still wore the veil more often than not, still struggled to believe in her own worth, still carried the wounds that years of cruelty had inflicted. But she was healing. Slowly, tentatively, one small act of courage at a time. And he would be there, for as long as it took, proving through actions instead of words that she was worthy of kindness, of respect, of a home where she could finally stop hiding. The dress was nearly finished now, its scars visible, but somehow beautiful in their honesty. Like Evelyn herself, damaged but whole, broken but mended, carrying evidence of survival that spoke more eloquently than perfection ever could. When they finally set aside their work for the night, Evelyn stood and picked up the dress, holding it at arm's length to examine their handiwork. "It's not what it was," she said softly. "But maybe that's okay. Maybe it's something better now." "I think it is," Wyatt agreed. "I think it's honest, and honest is always better than fancy." She turned to face him, and though he still couldn't see her expression through the veil, he felt the intensity of her gaze. "You meant what you said, didn't you? About damaged things still being precious?" "Every word." "Then maybe—" She hesitated, then continued more firmly. "Maybe tomorrow I'll wear this dress into town, with you, to order supplies for the barn." His heart stuttered in his chest. "Are you sure?" "No, but I'm going to do it anyway." She clutched the dress tighter. "Because you're right. I can't hide forever. And if I'm going to build a life here, I need to start living it, even if I'm terrified, even if people stare." "They might." "I know, but maybe—" She drew a shaky breath. "Maybe some of them will surprise me, like Mrs. Henderson did. And maybe, eventually, I'll stop letting fear make my decisions for me." Wyatt felt pride swell in his chest, so strong it was almost painful. "You're the bravest person I know, Evelyn Carver, and I'll be right beside you, every step of the way. Promise?" "Promise." She nodded and turned toward her room, the mended dress draped over her arm. At the doorway, she paused and looked back at him. "Wyatt, I'm starting to believe you. About everything. It's hard, and I'm still scared, but I'm starting to believe that maybe I'm not as worthless as I thought." "You were never worthless," he said firmly. "Not for one single second." "I know, or at least—" She touched the veil lightly. "I'm learning to know. Thank you for teaching me." Long after she'd retired for the night, Wyatt sat alone in the sitting room, staring at nothing and everything, feeling the weight of what tomorrow might bring. Taking Evelyn to town was a risk. People might be cruel, might say things that would set her healing back weeks or months. But it was also necessary, because she was right. She couldn't hide forever. And more than that, she deserved to walk through the world with her head held high, to claim her place in this community, to stop letting shame and fear dictate the boundaries of her life. Whatever happened tomorrow, whatever challenges they faced, he would be there beside her. Not to shield her from difficulty, she was strong enough to face it herself, but to stand witness to her courage, to remind her of her worth when she forgot, to be the steady presence that said without words, "You are not alone. You are valued. You are home." That was what partnership meant. That was what marriage, real marriage, built on honesty and respect, looked like. And for the first time since Margaret's death, Wyatt found himself genuinely hopeful about the future. Not because it would be easy, but because he'd found someone worth fighting for. Someone whose bravery inspired his own. Someone who made the hard work of healing feel possible. Tomorrow they would face Dry Creek together. Tomorrow, Evelyn would take another step toward claiming her place in the world. And he would be there, standing beside her, proud beyond measure of the woman she was becoming. Morning arrived with the kind of perfect clarity that made promises feel dangerous. Wyatt woke before dawn, his chest tight with anticipation and worry about what the day would bring. He lay in the darkness, listening to the house wake around him, the creak of floorboards in the next room, the soft sound of Evelyn moving about, the whisper of fabric against skin as she dressed. She was awake early, too. Probably hadn't slept much if the quiet restlessness he'd heard through the wall all night was any indication. When he finally rose and made his way to the kitchen, he found her standing by the window in the mended blue dress, her hands clasped so tightly at her waist that her knuckles showed white even through the gloves. The veil was in place, but something about her posture suggested a resolve that hadn't been there before. "Morning," he said quietly, not wanting to startle her. She turned, and he thought he saw her shoulders straighten. "Good morning. I made coffee." "Smells good." He poured himself a cup, giving her space to change her mind if she needed to. "You don't have to do this today, you know. We can wait. Go next week or the week after. Or, no." Her voice was firm despite the tremor underneath. "If I don't do it now, I'll talk myself out of it. I'll find reasons to wait, excuses to hide, and before I know it, another year will pass and I'll still be too afraid to leave the house." She drew a shaky breath. "I'm tired of being afraid, Wyatt. I'm tired of letting fear make my decisions." Pride swelled in his chest, fierce and warm. "All right then. We'll leave after breakfast." They ate in their usual arrangement, though he noticed she barely touched her food. Her nervousness was palpable, filling the room like a living presence, but she didn't back down. When the meal was finished and the dishes cleared, she retrieved her bonnet, the same one she'd worn when she arrived, and tied it carefully over the veil. "How do I look?" she asked, and he heard the vulnerability in the question, like someone brave enough to face down the world. "I don't feel brave. I feel terrified. That's what makes it brave." He reached for his hat. "Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing the hard thing even when you're scared to death." She nodded slowly, as if absorbing the words, then moved toward the door. He followed, noting the way her hands trembled as she gripped her reticule, the way her breathing had gone quick and shallow. The ride to town was quiet, the wagon wheels crunching over the dry road while the morning sun climbed higher and hotter. Evelyn sat rigid beside him, her face turned straight ahead, her entire body tense with anticipation of what was to come. Every few minutes, he'd glance at her, trying to gauge her state of mind, ready to turn the wagon around if she asked. She never did. As they crested the final hill and Dry Creek came into view below, its weathered buildings clustered along the main street like tired sentinels, he felt her stiffen beside him. "There's still time to go back," he offered quietly. "No." The word came out fierce and determined. "I'm not running anymore." They rolled into town just as the church bells struck 9, and Wyatt was grimly aware of the heads that turned, the conversations that stopped, the way people paused in their morning routines to stare at the wagon and its veiled passenger. He kept his expression neutral, his posture relaxed, but inside, anger simmered at the naked curiosity on display. He pulled the wagon to a stop in front of Miller's General Store and set the brake before climbing down. When he rounded the wagon to help Evelyn descend, he found her frozen on the seat, her eyes, hidden behind the veil, fixed on the small crowd that had gathered. "I can't," she whispered. "Wyatt, I can't do this. There are too many people. They're all staring. Hey." He kept his voice low and calm. "Look at me. Just me. Nobody else matters right now except you and me." Slowly, she turned her veiled face toward him. "You are Evelyn Carver," he said firmly. "You saved a child from a burning building. You crossed a continent to start over. You ran into a collapsing barn to save animals that weren't even yours. You're brave and strong and worthy of respect, and anyone who can't see that isn't worth your time." He extended his hand. "Now come down here and show this town what real courage looks like." For a long, breathless moment, she didn't move. Then slowly, she reached out and placed her gloved hand in his. Her fingers were trembling badly, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she let him help her down from the wagon, let him steady her when her legs nearly buckled, let him offer his arm as support. "Together?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "Together," he confirmed. They walked toward the store entrance, and Wyatt was acutely aware of every whisper, every pointed stare, every cruel word spoken just loud enough to be overheard. "Still hiding her face, I see. Must be truly awful under there. Poor Carver, married to a woman he can't even look at." He felt Evelyn flinch with each comment, felt her grip on his arm tighten until her fingers dug into his flesh through the fabric of his shirt. But she kept walking, kept her head up, kept putting one foot in front of the other despite the cruelty surrounding them. The store was blessedly empty when they entered, just Miller behind the counter and his wife arranging canned goods on the shelves. Both looked up at their entrance, and Wyatt saw the curiosity flash across their faces before they schooled their expressions into something more neutral. "Mr. Carver, Mrs. Carver." Miller nodded to each of them. "How can I help you folks today?" "Need to pick up some supplies," Wyatt said, keeping his tone casual. "Flour, sugar, coffee, the usual staples, plus some fabric if you have it. Evelyn wants to make new curtains for the house." It was a lie, but it gave her something to do, a reason to move around the store and occupy herself while he handled the main transaction. She seemed to understand because she moved toward the fabric display with careful steps, her hand trailing along the counter as if she needed its support. Mrs. Miller, to her credit, followed without commentary. "We just got some lovely calico in from Denver, and there's a nice muslin that would work well for curtains, lets in light, but gives you privacy." Wyatt watched out of the corner of his eye as the two women examined fabrics, Mrs. Miller making suggestions and Evelyn responding with quiet politeness. It was painfully ordinary, almost aggressively normal, and he felt grateful for the woman's tact. He was in the middle of settling his account with Miller when the door opened and a group of women entered. Mrs. Henderson, along with two others he recognized from church. They stopped short when they saw Evelyn, and for a moment, tension crackled through the air. Then Mrs. Henderson moved forward with a warm smile. "Mrs. Carver, how lovely to see you again. How are you feeling after the storm?" Evelyn turned slowly, and Wyatt could see her entire body trembling. I'm well, thank you. And you?" "Oh, we're all fine. Lost some shingles, but nothing serious." The older woman gestured to her companions. "I don't think you've met Mrs. Patterson and Mrs. Chen. Ladies, this is Evelyn Carver, Wyatt's new bride." The women exchanged pleasantries, and Wyatt marveled at Mrs. Henderson's ability to create normalcy through sheer force of will. She chattered about the weather, about garden plans, about the upcoming church social, treating Evelyn like any other woman in town rather than a curiosity to be gawked at. But not everyone was as kind. They were loading supplies into the wagon 20 minutes later when a man Wyatt recognized as Frank Pritchard, father of the gossiping twins and a notorious troublemaker, approached with a sneer on his weathered face. "So this is the famous veiled bride," Pritchard said loudly enough to draw attention. "What's the matter, Carver? Afraid to show us what you bought? She must be hideous under there if you're keeping her covered up like a diseased animal." Wyatt felt rage flood through him, hot and immediate. He took a step toward Pritchard, his hands clenching into fists, but Evelyn's voice stopped him. "Mr. Pritchard, is it?" She'd turned to face the man, her posture straight despite the trembling Wyatt could see in her hands. "You're quite right that I keep my face covered. Would you like to know why?" Pritchard's sneer faltered slightly, as if he hadn't expected her to engage. Well, when I was 16 years old, I ran into a burning church to save a 5-year-old boy who was trapped inside. Her voice was steady now, growing stronger with each word. I got him out alive, but a burning beam fell on me in the process. The scar it left runs from my temple to my jaw. It's extensive, and yes, it's unpleasant to look at. A crowd was gathering now, drawn by the confrontation. Wyatt wanted to intervene, wanted to shield her from this, but something told him she needed to do this herself. I wear the veil because people like you, Mr. Pritchard, have made it very clear that my face makes them uncomfortable, that my appearance is something to be hidden, mocked, feared. I wear it because I got tired of seeing disgust and pity in people's eyes. I wear it because it's easier to hide than to face constant cruelty. Her voice hardened. But I'm done with that now. I'm done letting other people's narrow-mindedness dictate how I live my life. Evelyn, Wyatt started, but she shook her head. No, I need to do this. She turned to address the growing crowd. You want to see what's under the veil? You want to satisfy your curiosity? Fine. But understand this. What you see doesn't define who I am. I am not my scar any more than you are your face or your name or your reputation. I am my actions, my choices, my character. And if you can't see past physical appearance to recognize that, then the failing is yours, not mine. With trembling hands, she reached up and began removing the pins that held the veil in place. Wyatt's heart hammered in his chest. He wanted to stop her, wanted to spare her this exposure, but he also understood that this was her choice to make, her moment to claim. The veil fell away. Sunlight struck her face fully for the first time since the storm, illuminating the scar in harsh detail. The puckered skin, the pulled tissue, the permanent reminder of fire and pain and sacrifice. But it also illuminated the rest of her, the delicate bone structure, the dark eyes blazing with defiance and fear and courage, the determined set of her jaw. The crowd went silent. Wyatt heard someone gasp, heard whispers starting, saw people's faces register shock, pity, curiosity, disgust, all the reactions Evelyn had learned to expect and had armored herself against. But then something unexpected happened. Old Mrs. Patterson stepped forward, her weathered face thoughtful. You saved a child, she said quietly. You have a hero's scar. Evelyn faltered, clearly not expecting validation. My grandson was burned in an accident 5 years ago, Mrs. Patterson continued. His face bears scars not unlike yours. People stare at him, call him names, treat him like he's less than human. It breaks my heart. She reached out and gently touched Evelyn's arm. But if he grows up to be half as brave as you, brave enough to save a life, brave enough to start over, brave enough to stand here and face us all despite knowing how cruel we can be, then I'll count myself blessed. Mrs. Chen stepped forward next, her expression gentle. I came to this country 20 years ago. Couldn't speak English, didn't know anyone, looked different from everyone else. People called me terrible names, treated me like I was stupid or dangerous just because of how I looked. She smiled sadly. I understand what it's like to be judged by appearance rather than character. And I'm ashamed that this town made you feel you had to hide. More voices joined in, people pressing forward with stories of their own struggles, their own scars. Some visible, some not. The hostility that had filled the air began to dissipate, replaced by something that felt almost like understanding, but not everyone was moved. That's all very touching, Pritchard sneered, though his bravado seemed shakier now. But it doesn't change the fact that she's brave? Wyatt cut him off, his voice hard as iron. Strong? Worthy of respect? You're right. It doesn't change those facts. What it does change is whether we're the kind of community that values courage and character or the kind that judges people by superficial appearances. He moved to stand beside Evelyn, his shoulder touching hers in silent support. My wife is the finest person I've ever known. And if you can't see that, Frank, then you're a damn fool. Pritchard's face flushed with anger, but before he could respond, Mrs. Henderson stepped between them. I think that's quite enough excitement for one morning, she said firmly, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd been a pillar of the community for 40 years. Frank, You should go home and think about whether your words today reflected well on your character. The rest of you, she turned to address the crowd, have work to do, I'm sure. Let's leave the Carvers in peace. The crowd began to disperse, some reluctantly, some with backward glances at Evelyn's exposed face. But they went, and within minutes, the street had returned to its normal midday quiet. Evelyn stood trembling in the sunlight, her face bare for the first time in years, tears streaming down her cheeks. I did it, she whispered. I actually did it. You did. Wyatt wanted desperately to embrace her but held back, unsure if touch would be welcome right now. You were magnificent. I was terrified. I know, but you stood your ground anyway. You claimed your right to exist without shame. That's... He shook his head, struggling to find adequate words. That's extraordinary, Evelyn. Mrs. Henderson approached them, her expression warm with approval. Mrs. Carver, that took tremendous courage. I hope you'll still consider coming to the church social next month. I think you'd find people more welcoming than you might expect. She paused. And if anyone gives you trouble, they'll answer to me. Thank you, Evelyn managed, her voice thick with emotion. Thank you so much. After Mrs. Henderson left, they finished loading the wagon in silence. Evelyn kept her face uncovered, though Wyatt noticed the way she flinched every time someone walked past. But she didn't hide, didn't retreat, just kept moving forward with that determined courage that left him in awe. They were about to climb into the wagon when a young woman approached hesitantly, a boy of perhaps 6 or 7 at her side. The child bore extensive burn scars on his left arm and neck, and he stared at Evelyn with wide, wondering eyes. Mrs. Carver? The woman's voice was soft, nervous. I'm Sarah Patterson. This is my son, James. He's Mrs. Patterson's grandson, the one she mentioned earlier. Evelyn turned to face them, and Wyatt saw her expression soften. Hello, James. The boy continued staring, then blurted out, You have scars like me. I do, Evelyn confirmed gently. Do people call you names? Sometimes, yes. Me too. The boy's face scrunched up with the effort of articulating something difficult. They call me monster. Say I'm ugly. Say God punished me for being bad. Evelyn knelt down, heedless of the dust, bringing herself to the boy's eye level. James, I want you to listen to me very carefully. Are you listening? He nodded solemnly. Those people are wrong. Scars don't make you a monster or ugly or bad. Scars are just proof that you survived something difficult. They're evidence of your strength, not your weakness. She touched her own face lightly. I got my scar saving someone's life. You know what that makes me? What? A hero. And you know what your scar makes you? The boy shook his head. A survivor. Someone brave enough to keep going even when things are hard. Someone strong enough to face the world even when people are cruel. She smiled, and Wyatt saw how it transformed her face, scar and all, into something luminous. Don't ever let anyone make you feel ashamed of your scars, James. Wear them proudly, because they're part of your story, part of what makes you uniquely, wonderfully you. The boy's eyes filled with tears. Really? Really. She reached out and gently squeezed his unburned hand. And the next time someone says something mean, you remember that their words say more about them than they do about you. You are brave and strong and perfect exactly as you are. James threw his arms around Evelyn's neck in an impulsive hug, and Wyatt saw her stiffen in surprise before slowly, carefully returning the embrace. When the boy finally pulled back, he was smiling through his tears. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you, his mother echoed, her own eyes wet. You have no idea how much he needed to hear that, how much we both did. She took James's hand. Come on, sweetheart. Let's let Mrs. Carver get home. As they walked away, Wyatt heard James say excitedly, Mama, did you hear? She said I'm a survivor. She said I'm brave. I heard, baby, and she's absolutely right. Evelyn remained kneeling in the dust for a long moment, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. When she finally stood, Wyatt was there, offering his arm for support. You all right? He asked quietly. Yes. No, I don't know. She wiped at her tears with trembling fingers. That boy, the way he looked at me, not with fear or disgust, but with recognition, understanding, like I was someone who finally saw him the way he needed to be seen. You did see him, and you gave him something precious, permission to stop being ashamed. Wyatt helped her into the wagon. You gave him hope. The ride home was quiet, but it was a different kind of silence than the tense anticipation of the morning. Evelyn sat with her face still uncovered, turned toward the sun as if absorbing its warmth after years in shadow. Occasionally he'd glance at her and find her touching her scar lightly, as if getting reacquainted with it after hiding it for so long. When the ranch came into view, she spoke for the first time since leaving town. I thought it would feel different. What would? Showing my face, standing up for myself. I thought it would feel triumphant, like some great victory. She was quiet for a moment. But mostly I just feel exhausted and scared and uncertain whether I did the right thing. You did, he said firmly. You absolutely did. How do you know? Because you gave that boy hope. Because you showed everyone watching that shame doesn't have to be permanent, that courage is possible even when you're terrified. Because you chose honesty over hiding, and that's always the right choice. He pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house. But even if none of that were true, even if it had gone terribly wrong, you still would have done the right thing, because you chose to live authentically, instead of in fear. That's what matters. She climbed down from the wagon without waiting for help, moving with the slow deliberation of someone utterly spent. I need to lie down, just for a little while. Take all the time you need. I'll handle the horses and the supplies. He watched her disappear into the house, then turned his attention to the mundane tasks of unhitching the team, unloading the wagon, putting everything in its proper place. The physical work was soothing, gave his hands something to do while his mind processed everything that had happened. She'd done it. She'd actually faced down the town, exposed herself to their judgment, and come through the other side. Not unscathed, he'd seen the way the cruel words had landed, seen the trembling and the tears, but intact. Still standing, still fighting. He was in the barn, putting away tack, when he heard the sound of a wagon approaching. He tensed, wondering who would be visiting, hoping it wasn't trouble in the wake of this morning's confrontation. But when he emerged into the sunlight, he found not one wagon, but three. Mrs. Henderson's buckboard, the Patterson wagon, and another he didn't recognize. And in those wagons were women from town, their arms loaded with covered dishes and baskets. Mrs. Henderson climbed down first, her expression warm but cautious. Mr. Carver, we hope we're not intruding. We just thought after this morning, well, we wanted to show our support. Your support? He was having trouble processing what he was seeing. Mrs. Patterson descended next, young James clinging to her skirts. Your wife did something remarkable today, something that needed doing. We want her to know that not everyone in Dry Creek is as narrow-minded as Frank Pritchard. Mrs. Chen joined them, along with several other women Wyatt recognized from church and the general store. We brought food, she explained, and flowers from our gardens, and, she gestured to one of the younger women, Mary Chen brought fabric for curtains, as a welcome gift. Wyatt felt his throat tighten with emotion. That's incredibly kind. But Evelyn is resting, and I don't know if she's up for— We don't need to see her, Mrs. Henderson interrupted gently. We just want to leave these things so she knows that she has friends here, that she's not alone. She paused. And if she wants to talk or needs help with anything, or just needs someone to sit with her, we're available. All of us. The women began unloading their offerings, and Wyatt stood aside, overwhelmed by the generosity on display. They worked quickly and efficiently, carrying covered dishes to the kitchen, arranging flowers in jars and bowls, leaving fabric and thread and small gifts of welcome throughout the house. They were nearly finished when Evelyn appeared in the doorway, her face still bare, her eyes wide with confusion and wonder. What's happening? The women turned as one, and for a moment nobody spoke. Then Mrs. Henderson stepped forward. We're welcoming you properly, dear, the way we should have from the beginning. She gestured to the laden table, the flowers brightening every surface, the small mountain of gifts. We want you to know that you have a place here, that you're valued, that what you did today, the courage you showed, matters to us. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. I don't understand. Why would you do this? Because you reminded us what real bravery looks like, Mrs. Patterson said quietly. Because you gave my grandson hope when he had none. Because you stood up and claimed your right to exist without shame, and that's something worth celebrating. Because you're one of us now, Mrs. Chen added, and we take care of our own. The tears spilled over, and Evelyn made no attempt to hide them. She moved from woman to woman, accepting embraces and kind words, overwhelmed by the outpouring of support. Wyatt watched from the doorway, his own eyes burning, amazed by the transformation that had occurred in the space of a single morning. After the women left, with promises to visit again, with invitations to church socials and quilting circles and garden clubs, Evelyn stood in the middle of the sitting room, turning slowly to take in all the evidence of acceptance surrounding her. I can't believe this is real, she whispered. I keep thinking I'll wake up and it will all have been a dream. It's real. Wyatt moved to stand beside her. You earned this, Evelyn. Through your courage, your honesty, your refusal to let shame define you. This is what you deserve. She turned to face him, and for the first time he saw her expression without any barrier between them. The joy and fear and hope and vulnerability all laid bare. I couldn't have done it without you, without knowing you believed in me, that you saw something in me worth valuing. If you hadn't... She stopped, her voice breaking. If you hadn't shown me what kindness looked like, I never would have found the courage to stop hiding. You had that courage all along. You just needed someone to remind you it was there. No. She shook her head firmly. You gave me more than reminders. You gave me safety. You gave me space to heal. You gave me patience when I was difficult, understanding when I was afraid, and respect when I thought I deserved none. She took a shaky breath. You saw me, Wyatt. Really saw me. Not the scar, not the shame, but the person underneath. And that changed everything. He wanted to tell her that seeing her had been easy, that recognizing her worth had required no effort at all, but the words seemed inadequate to the moment, insufficient to express the depth of what he felt. So instead, he did something he'd been wanting to do for weeks. He reached out, slowly and obviously, giving her every opportunity to pull away, and gently cupped her scarred cheek in his palm. She froze, her breath catching, her eyes going wide with shock, but she didn't retreat. This scar, he said quietly, his thumb brushing over the puckered tissue, is proof that you're the kind of person who runs toward danger instead of away from it, the kind of person who values other lives above your own comfort, the kind of person who survives fire and cruelty and keeps going anyway. He held her gaze. It's beautiful, Evelyn. Not despite being a scar, but because of what it represents. Courage, sacrifice, survival, all the things that make you extraordinary. Wyatt, her voice was barely a breath, I know we started this marriage as a convenience, two lonely people looking for companionship, but somewhere along the way it became something more. At least for me. He drew a shaky breath, making himself vulnerable in ways he hadn't since Margaret died. I love you, Evelyn Carver. I love your bravery and your honesty and your stubborn refusal to give up. I love the way you care for the garden and the chickens and that damn rooster who pecks at everyone except you. I love your quick mind and your gentle hands and your determination to build something better out of broken pieces. He paused. I love you, scars and all. Maybe especially the scars, because they're part of your story, part of what makes you who you are. The tears came in earnest now, streaming down her face unchecked. I don't know how to believe you. Part of me still thinks this is too good to be true, that any moment you'll realize what a mistake you've made. No mistake, he interrupted firmly. Best decision I ever made was sending for a mail-order bride. Best gift I ever received was you stepping off that stage. He smiled. Even if you did try to hide your face for 2 weeks. That earned him a wet laugh, and he counted it as a victory. I don't know if I love you yet, she said honestly, and he appreciated the truth of it. I don't know if I even know what love feels like anymore. It's been so long since anyone treated me with kindness that I'm not sure I can distinguish between gratitude and deeper emotion. She reached up and covered his hand with hers, pressing it more firmly against her cheek. But I know that when I think about my life now, I can't imagine it without you. I know that you make me feel safe and valued and seen in ways I never have before. I know that I trust you more than I've trusted anyone in years. And I know that I want to keep building this life with you, to see where this partnership takes us. She smiled through her tears. Maybe that's not love yet, but I think it could grow into something like it. If you're willing to be patient with me while I learn how. I've got all the time in the world, he said quietly, and I'm willing to wait as long as it takes. They stood there in the golden afternoon light, surrounded by flowers and food and evidence of community, and Wyatt felt something settle in his chest that he hadn't felt in 14 years. Not just contentment, not just the absence of loneliness, but actual happiness. The kind that came from building something real with another person, from choosing each other day after day, from the slow, patient work of turning strangers into partners and partners into something more. That evening, they sat together on the porch as the sun painted the western sky in shades of crimson and gold. The sign Wyatt had mounted that morning, "Home is where the brave heart dwells," caught the fading light, its carved letters throwing shadows across the weathered wood. "Tell me about her," Evelyn said suddenly. "Your first wife." "Margaret." Wyatt was quiet for a long moment, surprised by the request but understanding the need behind it. "She was good, kind. We married young. I was 23, she was 19. Both of us thought we knew everything about life and love and forever." He smiled sadly. "We knew nothing, of course, but we learned together." "Did you love her?" "Yes. Not the way poets write about, maybe. Not some grand passion that consumed everything in its path, but steady, comfortable. We were partners in the truest sense, building a life, working toward common goals, supporting each other through hard times." He paused. "When she died, I thought that was it for me. Thought I'd used up my one chance at companionship and would spend the rest of my days alone." "What changed?" "I got tired of talking to ghosts, tired of living in the past, tired of letting grief make my decisions." He glanced at her. "And I realized that love isn't a finite resource. That giving my heart to Margaret didn't mean I had nothing left to offer someone else. It just meant I'd learned what mattered: honesty, respect, shared effort. All the things that make a partnership work." "Do you still love her?" "I still remember her fondly, still honor what we had. But I'm not in love with her anymore. That ended when she did." He reached over and took Evelyn's hand, a gesture that felt natural now, right. The heart has room for multiple loves, if you let it. What I felt for Margaret doesn't diminish what I'm beginning to feel for you. They're different things, separate but equally valid. She squeezed his hand. "Thank you for telling me, for not pretending she didn't exist or that she didn't matter." "She did matter, just like your past matters, like the aunt who raised you matters, like every experience that made you who you are matters." He lifted her hand and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, a gesture of respect more than romance. "We're all the sum of our histories. The question is whether we let those histories trap us or whether we use them as foundations to build something new." "I want to build something new," she said quietly, "with you, starting now." "Then that's what we'll do." The weeks that followed brought gradual change, the kind that happened so slowly you didn't notice it until you looked back and realized how far you'd traveled. Evelyn began going into town regularly, sometimes with Wyatt and sometimes on her own. She attended the church social and discovered she had a talent for organizing committees. She joined the garden club and shared her knowledge of planting and cultivation. She visited young James Patterson regularly, and other scarred or different children began gravitating toward her, drawn by her acceptance and understanding. She still wore the veil occasionally, on days when the weight of being visible felt too heavy. But more often, she went barefaced, her scar catching the light, her chin held high despite the occasional stare or whispered comment. She was learning, slowly, to define herself by her actions rather than others' reactions. The barn was repaired with help from neighbors who showed up one Saturday morning with tools and lumber and good humor. They worked through the day, men and women both, and when the new roof was finally in place, they gathered for a dinner on the carver's porch, a celebration of community and second chances. The garden flourished under Evelyn's care, producing more vegetables than two people could consume. She began preserving the surplus, filling the root cellar with jars of pickles and preserves and canned goods that would carry them through the winter. She baked bread and shared it with neighbors. She tended the chickens with gentle hands and somehow convinced even the cantankerous general to tolerate her presence. She filled the journal Wyatt had given her with notes about plantings and weather and recipes, but also with observations about life and healing and the slow work of learning to see herself differently. He'd found it open one day, an accident he hadn't meant to pry, and glimpsed a single line that had made his chest tight. Today I looked in the mirror and saw a woman instead of a wound. Small victory, but mine. 3 months after that first trip to town, Evelyn stood in a field of wildflowers with Wyatt beside her, both of them dressed in their best clothes. The entire town had gathered, not out of obligation, but out of genuine affection for the couple who'd reminded them what courage looked like. Doc Harrison stood before them, serving as officiant for the renewal of their vows. The first ceremony had been rushed, practical, a legal arrangement more than a spiritual one. This time they wanted to do it properly, to stand before their community and make promises they actually understood and meant. "Wyatt Carver," Doc Harrison intoned, "do you take Evelyn to be your lawfully wedded wife, to honor and cherish in sickness and health for all the days of your life?" Wyatt looked at the woman beside him, this extraordinary person who'd walked through fire, literal and metaphorical, and come out stronger, and felt his heart overflow. "I do. Absolutely and without reservation. And Evelyn Carver," the doctor continued, "do you take Wyatt to be your lawfully wedded husband, to honor and cherish in sickness and health for all the days of your life?" Evelyn's voice was steady and clear, carrying across the field to where their neighbors stood watching with smiles and tears. "I do, with all my heart." "Then by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife." Again, Doc Harrison grinned. "Wyatt, you may kiss your bride. Properly this time." Wyatt cupped Evelyn's face in both hands, his thumbs brushing over her cheeks, one smooth, one scarred, both equally precious to him. "I love you," he said, quiet enough that only she could hear. "Every complicated, courageous inch of you." "I love you too," she whispered back, and this time there was no hesitation in the words. "You taught me how." Their kiss was gentle, reverent, full of promise for all the days ahead. When they finally pulled apart, the crowd erupted in cheers and applause, and someone started playing a harmonica, a lively tune that got feet tapping and bodies swaying. The celebration lasted until sunset, with food and music and dancing and the kind of joy that comes from witnessing something beautiful being born from pain. Young James Patterson gave them a drawing he'd made, 2 stick figures holding hands under a smiling sun, with Mr. and Mrs. Brave written in careful block letters underneath. Mrs. Henderson brought her famous apple pie. The Chen family performed a traditional blessing. Even Frank Pritchard made an appearance, though he stayed at the edges and left early without causing trouble. As the light faded and the stars began appearing in the vast New Mexico sky, Wyatt and Evelyn stood together, watching their neighbors pack up and depart, calling out thanks and goodbyes and promises to visit soon. "We did it," Evelyn said softly, leaning against his shoulder. "We actually built something real." "We did." He wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her close. "Together." "Together," she agreed, and the word felt like a vow all its own. They walked back to the house hand in hand, past the garden bursting with life, past the repaired barn standing solid against the night, past the sign that declared this place a home for brave hearts. Inside, the rooms they'd filled with careful work and patient effort waited. Not perfect, but honest. Not fancy, but real. Everything they'd promised each other from the beginning. In the years that followed, their story became part of Dry Creek's collective memory, the tale of the veiled bride and the patient rancher who taught each other what love really meant. People would point to their ranch when talking about second chances, about the courage it takes to start over, about how broken things can be mended if you're willing to do the work. Evelyn never forgot the shame and fear of those early days, but she learned to carry them differently, not as burdens that defined her, but as reminders of how far she'd traveled. She continued working with scarred and different children, showing them through example that their worth wasn't determined by appearance, that courage was always possible, that they deserved love and respect exactly as they were. Wyatt watched her grow into her strength, watched her claim space in the world with increasing confidence, and felt grateful every single day for the impulse that had led him to send for a mail-order bride. He'd been looking for someone to fill the emptiness in his house, and instead, he'd found someone who'd filled the emptiness in his heart. They built a life together in that harsh, beautiful land. Not perfect, never perfect, but honest and real, and full of the kind of love that grows from choosing each other every day. They faced difficulties and setbacks, good years and hard ones, but they faced them together, as partners, as best friends, as two people who'd learned that true beauty had nothing to do with appearances and everything to do with character. And on quiet evenings, when the work was done and the world had gone soft and gentle in the fading light, they would sit together on their porch and watch the stars emerge one by one above the valley. Sometimes they talked, sharing their days and their dreams. Sometimes they sat in comfortable silence, just being together. But always, Wyatt would reach for her hand, and Evelyn would take it without hesitation, their fingers intertwining in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. And in those moments, they both understood the truth they'd learned together through trial and patience and stubborn determination. That beauty fades in dust and sun, but love built on honesty endures forever. That damage doesn't mean worthless. That courage isn't the absence of fear, but the choice to keep going despite it. And that sometimes the best things in life come not from perfection, but from the brave and messy work of healing together. The dress still hung in their closet, mended, imperfect, with visible scars that told the story of survival and renewal. Evelyn wore it on special occasions, proud now of its imperfections, grateful for what they represented. She'd whispered once, in the darkness after the veil had finally come off for good, "I'm not pretty." And Wyatt had replied, his voice full of absolute certainty, "You're better than pretty. You're real. You're brave. You're mine. And that's everything I'll ever need." She believed him now. Finally, completely, she believed him. And that belief, that fundamental shift in how she saw herself, was the truest measure of the distance they'd traveled together. From strangers united by loneliness to partners bound by choice. From hiding to claiming space. From shame to pride. From merely surviving to truly living. Together, they'd built a home where brave hearts dwelled. And together, they would keep building it, day by patient day, for all the years that remained to them. It was enough. More than enough. It was everything.